Yeah. We just ran out of fried fruit. Our granddaughter was here twice since Christmas, and she goes to the play and gets a handful. Of course, our granddaughter's the big picture. She's 16. Okay. Just me. No, mine dangle on the outside. I just put them all away.
So there were 10 people. No, I'd rather have to. So I don't seem to be. You have to make an appointment. Book an appointment.
And that was on went off.
That one I get the big, if it takes 5
I don't know.
I swear it. I can't, spin on mine and off with it.
No.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, so
No, something not just true.
oh, we're good.
I know, that's what I was thinking. Maybe the parks will put one and then around well, and I said that to her. I said,
Oh, yeah. Let me try if not, I'll just talk about 100. I know it's hard to really. I mean, I wish you would
Because he knows you have it.
That is hooked in. That's hooked in. It's got a light on. I can just stop. I don't
I don't think it's it started to flare up.
just undo this one.
Yeah, you know when you go to this house, people like that.
Violet's telling me if you're going it's light up.
Well, you know what? I wouldn't expect it to work. I can draw it and I can generate it. And all
Okay, call the meeting to order. So, excuse me. Use the gavel. I don't want to start now. Thanks, Fred. How we doing, John? Good. Waking up again. Okay. Recognizing that Councillor Colson is over there, but I'm sure he is participating. Free call the meeting to order for the regular meeting of February the 16th, 2015. First off, just with regards to the order of items on the agenda, I think we're appropriately 6 item A1, Foothills Next Steps, related to my request to put this on the agenda should in fact be under unfinished business, item number 7. And then item, again, another item, agenda item, public meeting versus in-camera meeting, with a memo for myself, should be more appropriately under new business. So that would be 9C. Any other additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda? Could I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? Councilor Hames, seconded by Councilor Newgrave. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of minutes, January the 19th, 2015, special council meeting minutes. So moved by Councilor Scott, seconded by Councilor Savage. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. January the 26th, 2015, regular council meeting minutes. Council Secretary makes a motion or amends. Councilor Hames, seconded by Councilor Newgrave. Thank you. Discussion? None. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Which gets us to Jeannie Drew, Emergency Program Coordinator, Tom Arnett, Manager Building Bylaw and Emergency Planning Services at the RDN, to give us a District of Lantzville Emergency Services overview for information. Jeannie.
Good evening, Council. I think I will abandon my PowerPoint because it's not quite going to work out. Tom, maybe could you advance it? No. Different projector. Good evening. My name is Janie Drew. I'm the Emergency Coordinator with the Regional District of Nanaimo, and I've been the appointed Emergency Coordinator with the District of Lantzville since 2008, when we started the Agreement for Service of Emergency Management. I have a background in security and law enforcement, bylaw enforcement, and an operational background in forestry, forest firefighting, and some technical swiftwater and rope certification. That helps me be able to relate to a lot of first responders that I work with. I have a degree from University of Victoria and certificate in emergency management from Justice Institute of BC. And I participate in ongoing training to keep my skills and knowledge current. I was requested by the province to participate in the 2007 Frechette flooding in Fraser Fort George. I participated in over 15 real-time evacuations in the regional district of Nanaimo. I am in the Building Bylaw and Emergency Planning Department, and that is managed by Mr. Tom Arnett, who's here this evening. So tonight we're going to talk about preparedness, response, hazard mitigation, and recovery. We call those the 4 pillars of emergency management, and then just talk about some of the activities that are on the radar for this year. So legislation, that's what drives absolutely everything for emergency management. We have some obligations under the Emergency Program Act and the regulation. The regulation defines the roles and responsibilities of the local authority. It says you have to have an emergency management organization, appoint a coordinator, which you've done, and prepare plans to prepare, respond to, and recover from emergencies and disasters. So the district has a current emergency plan that will be undergoing another update in 2015. But the biggest obligation of local authority is to be operationally ready at all times. So it's a never-ending cycle, emergency management. So we begin with preparedness that gets us ready for response and recovery. And then once we know what our hazards are, we look to try to find ways to reduce that mitigation, to reduce our risk through mitigation. So as you can see, when response happens, it's, you can't be figuring things out right then at the time. You have to have everything ready. Community recovery takes a long time, and our emergency social services is the short end of recovery. So this diagram shows really clearly all the activities we do and how we interact with other entities in the community. So I'll start with preparedness, talking about that. Preparedness increases our ability to respond and to recover more quickly. So first of all, we look at staff emergency preparedness, because if staff aren't ready to begin their emergency role and to have their grab-and-go bag ready, so they can't serve the community. Then we look in the community ways that we can encourage the public to prepare through workshops, displays, we attend community events. We also have a neighborhood emergency preparedness program in the district, and we work with our stakeholders. Hazard mitigation. On the district's website, there is a hazard vulnerability risk analysis, and a consultant was hired in 2009 to look at some of the hazards in the area and to rank those according to likelihood, frequency, and impact. So the biggest threat in the area is wildland-urban interface fire. So knowing that, that helps to point where a lot of the program attention should be spent. We used another grant and produced a community wildfire protection plan that pointed out certain areas that are at more risk of interface fire. So therefore, we work with the community and the fire department on promoting fire smart practices that homeowners can do around the home, and also be interacting with staff about fire smart practices that can become part of the planning process and development process. We also look at earthquake readiness. That's the other high hazard here all over the island, and BC, of course. We participate in shake-out earthquake drills, helping staff and council, school children, and the public prepare for that. And looking at infrastructure robustness. So again, through public works, ensuring that there will be usable infrastructure if we have a big earthquake. So moving along to response, you see some pictures of training up there at a big tabletop exercise we had. So staff get to practice the roles, not only staff, but council members as well. So response actions are taken during or immediately after the response. It's all about managing the consequences. We have a whole system of how we run an emergency so people understand their roles. It covers the council is the policy group, and I've made some, you've got your booklets there you can keep with you. It's just a nice snapshot of information for your role. And we also have an emergency management agreement with the other municipalities, RDN and First Nations, so that we can draw upon, we know how to share resources, share command, and jointly manage public information in advance of any large emergency. And as I mentioned, we do have an emergency plan. There's a whole separate presentation on that if council so wishes. So as I said, our biggest job is making sure that we're ready to go at any time. And that means that we have to be able to set up an emergency operations center in these council chambers. So we have had practice setups here, and we do have some equipment to help get set up. Staff undertakes training. There'll be more training this year. Emergency Management BC puts on a workshop for returning and newly elected officials, and that will be happening in April. We posted here in Nanaimo. And you'll learn more about your role as the policy group, hoping as many can come to that as possible. So through the service contract with the RDN, you not only get myself as a staff person who works on this every day, but you get the resources of the entire regional district of Nanaimo. So that means there are 57 fully trained emergency operations center staff that could either work here in Lantzville or together. Full use of our emergency operations center on the Hammond Bay Road site, which has a generator. Have two backups for my position, the two bylaw enforcement officers. So there's continuous coverage whether I'm here or not. You have full use of our GIS department for emergency and evacuation planning, mapping, any facility or equipment use. Also inclusion in any response planning or public education campaigns. Another piece of response are our public safety lifeline groups. We have amateur radio and emergency social services and search and rescue. A new team that's been developed in the last year in the district is emergency social services. So these are volunteers that look after the immediate needs of evacuees. And you can call it band-aid care. It's really just the first 72 hours to help people get on their feet, and then they can begin longer-term recovery planning. So it's basic needs like food and shelter and transportation and incidentals. and work with other community organizations to provide more specialized services like emotional support, childcare, and first aid. Emergency social services is most commonly provided at the smallest level, 1 to 10 evacuees, and this is typically an uninsured house fire. And volunteers will show up at the house fire and assess the needs of evacuees and provide the services if they need that. So it could be a small scale response where volunteers are helping out at the site, or it could be that a transit bus is used as a mobile reception center. So the bus could roll up to the site, and either people could be processed in the bus, or it could just be a place for volunteers to mobilize and keep warm as well. Group lodging and providing on-site services to responders. In some cases, ESS can be extended beyond the 72 hours with approval by the province. So as I said, there were not volunteers in Lantzville. Last year was very productive, and a team was recruited, 25 members, and with a team leader, Ken Magson. And the team's been very busy throughout the year, signing up emergency resource suppliers, and working on community events, and getting the reception center operational. They've hosted some training courses here, and we'll be doing more this year. And one of the really important things is that the level 1 team that responds to usually the house fires have a schedule, so they have an on-call team on a monthly rotation now. And there'll be some leadership training ongoing for the team this year. So that kind of moves us along to recovery, the longer-term recovery beyond the 3-day Band-Aid care. And we work very closely with the Canadian Red Cross and other helping agencies in the community. And those help us focus on the human consequence side of disaster recovery. And the District of Lantzville also works with Public Works to focus on infrastructure robustness in recovery. So if we look ahead to what we're going to be doing in 2015, staff training is top of the list because we must make sure that we're operationally ready at all times. And there will be a series of emergency management BC webinars throughout the year. And staff are already signed up for emergency evacuations and other courses put on by the Justice Institute of BC coming up this spring. There's 2. There'll also be another disaster simulation, a full-on simulation. The volunteers participated last year, and we'll be doing that again, and hopefully looking for more volunteers to participate. And Emergency Social Services will be hosting some training here this year, working on making the reception center operational and ongoing recruitment. We hope to grow the neighborhood emergency preparedness program in the area as well. We've already got some workshops being booked for those. And we'll also be hosting a rapid damage assessment course this year, and we hope that volunteers and members of the public will be able to participate in that as well. And we'll have another big emergency preparedness event that Lantzville will be part of as well. So that's my presentation for this evening.
Questions from council? Councillor Coulson.
What is done on the marketing side of this, or publicizing these initiatives? I can recall something that came up last year with the team and doing the drill, I think, but I'm largely unaware of the activities you've been doing. So I'm curious if there's initiatives coming for that, or am I just in?
Well, we try to engage the public as much as we can, and we use local media, paper and print and social media to get the word out. We want to encourage disaster resilience in a way that's meaningful to people around their homes, so I call it backyard resilience. So any way that we can get a workshop being hosted or any community group interested, so we like to knock on their doors.
Councillor.
Thank you for coming. It's always great to hear what you guys do. You listed a number of support organizations that provide assistance. Do you sort of oversee or coordinate all these groups too? Or?
Within the region, I do have a coordination role with our helping agencies, and there is a regional recovery working group that I head up.
That's one more question. Do you represent emergency preparedness for all of the RDN or just District 68 or?
We provide an electoral area service in addition to Lantzville, so the service is for all the electoral areas, and I work in conjunction with our other municipal partners, just in a working relationship with, but not providing service to them.
And all the electoral areas are partners?
Yes.
Further comments, questions? Just a question with regards to resources and working with, for example, those other municipal partners. Is there kind of like a mutual aid agreement per se, similar to our fire departments?
We do have the emergency management agreement, and that's the overarching document that describes how we will work together in a big regional or extended emergency. And that lays out the command structure, how we share resources, jointly manage public information. That document is available from staff.
Would that carry over to, say, specific incidents within an area? Let's say, for example, we had a wildfire issue here in Lantzville, and our resources weren't enough to deal with the evacuations or whichever. Could we draw on those mutual resources?
Yes, so in addition to automatically having the RDN resources as part of the service agreement, you can draw upon all of the partners, municipal and First Nations support as well.
Okay. Any further from council? One last thing for me, you made mention of doing a presentation on the details of the emergency plan itself.
Yes.
Okay.
I have that available for council and staff wish to look into that further. It's available at your convenience to share that.
Question to staff. That's something our council. Is that something you're interested in the future?
A question, is that the one that was produced a few years ago? It was 2-3 years ago. There was basically a document produced and was specific to Lantzville.
There are several documents, but this is a presentation that's like an executive summary of the emergency plan.
Okay.
So is that different than what's going to happen in April?
Yes, that will be the province telling elected officials what your role is and what your responsibilities are. This is my presentation covers our whole response operation plan. It's about an hour long if council is interested. At a later time.
Something possibly if you can work with Kyla and find a mutually convenient point in the schedule. Any further from council? That's good. Thank you very much, Jane. Thanks, Tom. Next item up is a presentation from Lynn Reed with regards to the Lantzville Historical Society request for district assistance to secure working storage space. Ma'am?
Yes, you got my letter?
Yes, we have a letter dated February the 2nd, as well as some details in email dated February the 4th.
So you all got it?
Okay, so no presentation, just straight to it. Council, in our agenda package, this is the initial opening letter dated February the 2nd, detailing the reasons for a request for assistance in acquiring space, and then the specifics of it are on the email of February the 4th. Councilor Scott.
I'm not specifically aware of any space that's available. I think we'd have to go through staff to see if there is anything available, particularly that's accessible on a 24/7 basis. One of the questions I have, though, is maybe another potential solution, maybe through a grant and aid, and then having some dollars to be able to actually find something if there isn't anything else available. Those may be a couple alternatives.
That actually is probably what happens in virtually every other municipality province.
Grant aid?
Archives are generally speaking run by a society, financed by local government, or the provincial government, or whatever. So a grant that would cover rent on a space would be great.
Any further from council? Any questions, comments, direction to staff? Council or staff?
Yeah, I'd like to move that we request a staff report. Costing Hall is probably one of the opportunities, if there is any. So maybe that staff report could be done in conjunction with the Seaside Society and Councillor Scott as the rep or council. So I'll look at opportunities for accommodating the Historical Society.
I'll second that.
Second by Councillor Milbank. Discussion? Councillor Milbank?
I'm glad that Councillor Savage made that motion. The Lantzville Historical Society has been patiently requesting any form of assistance and has brought these issues to council's attention, I would say, a number of times. And I think that it's something that we should put the attention into looking at. I know that this issue has been somewhat distorted by discussions about the overall use of the church, so that might account for why the more practical aspect of this hasn't exactly moved forward, but the Historical Society should be clearly recognized as a great service for the community, and certainly we don't want to lose that history and that connection with our past just for lack of space.
Councillor Hain?
Through you, just a question to Lynn. So right now you have the downstairs of the Caution Hall, correct? You guys have access to that room downstairs.
That space is full of artifacts.
Okay.
What we're looking for is archival storage.
So you want room
Documents,
upstairs?
photographs, that kind of stuff. We have outgrown our filing cabinet in your storeroom. And we don't have decent, we can't really access what we've got.
Okay, so you're looking for room upstairs, basically.
Not necessarily upstairs, just
We're looking for
alternative,
space.
alternative
Oh,
space.
just space. Anyway, okay.
Any further discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion? Oh, sorry.
Could I just clarify? I wasn't specifically saying Costing Hall,
No.
accommodating the Historical Society within public buildings. Maybe that's a broader.
Mm.
Okay. Actually, just a question on that. In the event that it can't, would there be an expectation of additional direction such as grants and aid and or financial assistance of some sort?
Can we just restart?
Well, but staff needs some parameters. If it's just a space issue, staff surveys district buildings and goes yes or no, there's space. If council wishes to go further, recognizing the suggestion of grants and aid or something of that nature, I think we should include that in the direction of staff. Councillor Scott?
I was going to suggest a friendly amendment is to say that for other alternatives, if staff can, in the report, look at potential solutions.
Okay.
Overall, I don't think we should limit it to just district buildings and maybe other things that
That's what I
may
want
be.
clarification
Okay.
Yeah, I'm around with you.
Seconder, all right with that? Jennifer? Okay. Okay, any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Any further that you need at this point, Lynn?
No, not really. Speed on this would be nice.
Okay, let me ask that question.
Because
Staff,
I
I know you hate
cannot,
that question, but
I can't start writing that second book until I can get the information.
Staff has a number of those priorities right now. Sewer grant application that's being finalized for Wednesday, the strategic planning report that needs to be prepared, financial reporting requirements, project. It's difficult to say.
okay.
Sorry.
Okay, so how about if we just suggest that kind of keep in touch and see how it progresses? Okay. Any further from council? Okay. Hearing nothing, sorry, Councillor.
Items like this, are they recorded somewhere as a ongoing reminder of what's kind of ruined and where things are?
You mean in terms of progress of, say, a report or something like that?
Yeah, like I think of this one in particular, last meeting, there was one about the sandwich board. There's a few things that are kind of in the works, and so I was curious if there's an inventory list that we review periodically or
That becomes part of my CEO report,
CO report, okay.
and it's going to factor into your strategic planning this go around as well, just because of the number of other items that have been added to strategic direction that council has provided through the meeting that we had back in January.
Okay, CAO report, I recall you try to do it monthly, but that doesn't.
Yes. Efforts will be made to meet the monthly schedule.
Any further? Nothing further. Let's move on to correspondence. There's 2 items of correspondence on the agenda related to the regional district of Nanaimo. Both of them have to do with an increase in maximum requisition possibilities. One related to Southern Community Transit Plan.
Did we vote on that last part?
Yes, we did.
A second one regarding liquid waste management planning service amendment. The first item under 5A deals with the Southern Community Transit side of things. Basically, there's a bylaw out there that has maximums in there. With regards to the cost of running the transit system, it's now pushing up against those maximums. So there's a suggestion of, or there has been a vote at the RDN board that needs 2/3 of participants' approval. So they're looking for consenting to the adoption of the amendments as detailed in the agenda. Councillor Coulson, go ahead.
I'd like to get clarification on this one because the dollar amount and the unit value doesn't make sense to me to the greater than $9 million or 0.6399 per thousand. So I'd like clarification on that.
What that has to do with, in fact, right now, the cost of the bus system is about approximately $8 million. Because the formula is a greater of calculation, the 0.512 per thousand has covered that off. Now it's in a situation where that's not covering it off, and therefore there's a need to increase it. So the fact that that mentions 9.2 million and isn't a proportional change from 2.8 million doesn't truly reflect what's actually being collected currently. So right now, for example, it's roughly about 8 million or 0.512 foot. Yeah. Councillor Scott?
I was just going to clarify that basically they're what I see is they're bumping the 2.8 million mark, and they need to increase it. And because it's in 4, the 0.152 or 512 per thousand, or the 2.8, and they bumped the 2.8 million
to reflect more accurately what's actually being collected now.
Well, yeah, because there's more and more growth,
yeah,
and therefore more taxes. It's the dollar amount they're hitting against, not the assessment amount.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah, a question. So does this mean if we agree to this, our taxes for transit are going up?
No.
And are we going to get any more service?
Interesting question. The ability for them to tax it increases, but there's still the budget process that goes through consideration of service levels, et cetera, around the transit system between us, the Area A, et cetera. So could taxes go up? Sure. But it's only because of function of the budget, not because they're collecting money to just salt it up. I know you don't believe it. Councillor Savage.
So question, so this is not captured in the 5.6% RDN increase that you're talking about?
Well, actually, our transit increase itself is, this is not changing the taxation level, for example, for this year. That's established by the budget related to the transit department. So the transit department goes through their budget and figures out what expenses they have. Then they say, okay, we need X dollars to cover those expenses. The problem they're beginning to run into in this and in a variety of other areas is when they go to say, this is the number that we need, the bylaw doesn't allow them to collect that much. So like I said, they still go through the regular process of vetting the budget based on expenses. It's just when they're going to collect the money to cover those expenses, functionally, administratively, they're running into these ceilings.
Smoke and mirrors.
Your words, not mine. My words. Councillor Scott.
2 things. First off, it is the way I've always viewed these is it's just setting a cap that's the maximum amount they can use. And they don't have to use that maximum amount.
Correct.
So basically, it sets a maximum parameter, and then they can budget below that.
Right.
The question I have is, we were talking the RDN budget has been reduced from 7.2% to 5.6%, I think it is.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that is transit?
We were at 117,000, and keep in mind, transit's not just the buses on the road; it's the custom transit to Handguard.
Yep.
We were at $117,000 for our portion of transit. It's now down to $112,000.
It's gone down.
It's gone down, however, do note that the previous year it was $100,000. So it's still a sizable increase, and that has to do with a couple of factors. Number one, we had an increase in our proportional use of custom transit. And number two, when it comes to the standpoint of the bus system itself, let's try and follow this. In 2013, there was a service increase. That was only partially implemented, and in fact, when it comes to the actual usage, there's a 1-year delay. So the usage numbers for 14 or 13 actually affect 2015, if that makes sense. So in that respect, we are showing technically in our 2015 budget an increase in service, despite the fact that it actually occurred in 2013.
So we're talking, just so I'm clear, we were talking 117,000, and we were talking 100,000, and then you're saying 112.
Yeah, 2014 was 100,000.
Yes.
The original proposed budget was 117,000. It's now down to
112. This is for 2015.
Correct. Correct.
Gotcha.
And there's no service increase in 2014 or 2015 that will affect 2016
So in essence, it's a 12%.
for that line item. Correct. Correct.
And that's primarily because of handicap.
That's part of it. There's also some increases related to a replacement, I guess, of bus exchanges, including one downtown. It was in a temporary position on Prideaux Street, but they're looking to make it more permanent now. And that has associated costs that are spread amongst all the participants of Southern Community Transit. Councilor Neal.
What's the implication if we don't support this?
I admit I haven't compared the budget to the bylaw itself to see whether or not there'd be an implication today. But certainly at some point in the future, when it comes to it, whether or not our opting out probably wouldn't have an effect, because I would suspect the other areas would approve it. But sooner or later, costs will rise, even with the existing usage, and they'll run into that problem, so we'd look at cutting services. Thank you, Councilor Scott.
I guess one of the challenges with this is that we have regular bus service and we have handy-dart. And regular bus service is probably reasonably predictable, whereas handy-dart's on an on-call use. It's a customized taxi service, essentially.
Yeah.
So it's very, very difficult for us to have any control over those costs.
Yeah, we have virtually none.
Depends how much the residents of Lantzville use.
Well, and not only that, because our population is relatively small and the number of individuals taking advantage of the handy-dart system are relatively small, if we get new residents, say 3 that use the handy-dart system, that creates a fairly sizable increase in our percentage of usage based on what we currently incur. But yeah, we have no control over that. Okay, so is there a motion? There isn't. Yeah. So, what would council like to do?
I'll make a motion to put on the table that we approve the Southern County Transit Service Amendment bylaw.
Consents to the adoption.
Consent to the adoption.
Okay, and then further instruct our staff. We have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councilor Newgate. Discussion, Councilor Scott.
I appreciate having transit service here, but I do have some real concerns because I see a lot of buses going by empty on a very regular basis, like nobody on the buses, full-size bus. And I don't know if, and I've talked to people about this before, is whether the RDN has looked at provisions of smaller buses for some of the routes that aren't used so heavily, and that at least the operating costs should be lower, although not probably hugely, because I'm sure wages make up a significant portion of that. But it's very, very expensive for a small community, especially when you get these kind of acres.
Councillor Brigade and Councillor Colson.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to pick up a bit on what Councillor Scott said. Yeah, big buses going around empty. And then when you query transit about it, say, oh, well, the majority of the operating costs are for the driver. Therefore, that sort of justifies not looking at bus size. I've operated equipment before, and I know it costs a hell of a lot more to operate a big piece of equipment than a little piece of equipment, regardless of who's driving it. And, I just wish transit would look at something like this. And I don't know if that's profit to bring to the table, but it's irked me for years. So, I'm done.
I can't pinpoint where I recall this, but I thought the RDN did a transportation survey or a ridership survey or something, and they were attempting to, I guess, move toward addressing some of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say it was about 2 years ago I recall seeing that, but I could be off. Is that something that's actively done, or is that a special request item that they do? Or?
Okay. Couple things. First off, I believe it was Director Bastwick has made the request for information on cost of ridership per hour, or cost per hour of running various buses. There have been discussions about whether or not a smaller bus would effectively decrease cost, recognizing the ridership. And as noted, I mean, whether it's big or small, it still has a driver, it still gets union wage, it still gets union wage, etc. So the cost savings is not as much as people might think. A further complicating factor is that a large portion of the cost of the regular transit service and the custom is subsidized by BC Transit. And so even if we cut the cost by $1, it's not saving $1 in taxes because of those transfers that come from BC Transit. I just got some information from Daniel Pierce of the RDN, and I haven't had a chance to go through it in complete detail, but they do have usage stats. In terms of like custom transit, number of annual trips was 1,403 in Lantzville, which represents 2.4% of the total service when it comes to that standpoint. With regards to the regular service, it's certainly within our ability as a community to request a decrease in service, recognizing the buses going around without people on, or very few people on. That's certainly a policy decision that's within our ability to do. Councillor.
I was going to comment. I've got the stats on the population breakdown here, and in Lantzville, we've got about 28% of seniors in the community. So, we do have a bit proportionate higher user of that custom service. When I'm pretty sure Area C actually doesn't have, or for the longest time, did not have the traditional bus service in their area. They just had custom service because the cost was too prohibitive for them. So it is something we can look at, and we've always been skewed because of our high senior component in our community. And basically, they come to the doctor's office here, and to the pharmacy, and it's just the way it is.
Councillor Colson and Councillor Scott.
So it's 1,403, that's transit plus handy dart?
No, that's just the handy dart, the custom transit.
Just the handy dart?
Yeah.
Okay. I was going to say it's $80 a trip based on $112,000.
Well, no, yeah, keep in mind.
Yeah, we need it totally right.
And some of that information is what Director Best was looking for. Councillor Scott and Councillor Milne.
It's something that's an ongoing struggle. It's with having transit is its density. You need density to support transit. I think I've seen studies before that you need, I think it's 12 units per acre or some such number, 14 units per acre to make transit viable. Otherwise, it has to be very heavily subsidized. And that's what we face here. I don't know what the answer is, but it's certainly what my point was at that much.
Councillor Milne?
I'm actually going to be voting against this motion for some of the reasons that we've been discussing throughout the meeting. This is a difficult budget year, and although I realize this is only increasing the cap, the inevitable, they wouldn't be asking for an increase in the cap unless the intention was to increase the amount that Lantzville residents were going to get taxed through the RDN. It's a source of general frustration that although in our tax bill, the residents sometimes look at it and they think, you know, they look at the big number of how much they're obliged to pay and compare it to last year. The actual fact is that a large portion of that is due to other agencies, and the RDN is a big chunk of it, although the members of this council, with the exception of the mayor, don't have any control over what that number looks like at the end of the day. We don't often get opportunities to indicate how we feel as individual members of council about expenditures at the RDN, but I agree with Councillor Coulson's comments earlier during our committee of the whole meeting that a 5.6% tax increase, and I believe that the RDN generally has fairly large tax increases, is not sustainable over the long run, and I have a hard time scrimping and saving in the Lantzville budget for programs that are strongly needed in order to put more money into the RDN system. So those are my reasons why I'm going to be voting against it.
Councillor Savage.
Yeah, just a minor comment. What Councillor Mingrave commented on earlier. I've had the same thoughts with smaller buses. However, I was told a couple of years ago that the decisions on the type of bus are made with transit, BC Transit, not local.
It's done in consultation with the RDN side of things, but effectively the buses are leased from
They buy it
BC Transit itself. Councillor Niemann.
You mentioned earlier the option of requesting modification of service to Lantzville and presumably realizing cost savings. Now, I don't think anybody would like to see less transit service to Lantzville. In fact, I think if anything, we'd like to see more. Certainly I would. Can we make the request rather than having a big bus with 2 people on it, if you're lucky, that we send one of the smaller buses around the number 10 line?
Well, certainly we can make the request itself, but recognizing their capital side, whether or not it's possible, I don't know.
In the planning process, certainly, I mean, you begin from square one because it's, I just don't believe it that, you know, have a big bus drive around Lantzville costs the same as a little bus.
Councillor Hank.
I believe we did do that actually in 2010. We actually tried to go to the van model because Parksville and Qualicum, I believe, do have some smaller buses in their area. So we were trying to get the same here. The problem is the number 10 bus that does Lantzville service is a big part of the Nanaimo too, so it just sort of carries on. So I support the idea, but that's usually why we're being shut down.
It's still, as I recall, the run, it goes down Dickinson and messes around. It's not, whenever I've seen it, even on the Nanaimo side, there's not a lot of people on it.
Just an interesting point, Gabriola has a society effectively that runs, and it's quite successful in terms of things. So
Like a pay-per-use?
it's kind of a community, bus.
Yeah, they bought themselves a 15-seater bus.
Yeah, they're trading another one in and buying a different model now. It's really kind of interesting to do. Okay, so motion on the table with regards to it, or motion on the floor. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion failed. Councillor Scott.
I was going to suggest this anyways, but probably more so now. I think we need to have a general discussion with RDN regarding transit. That's probably maybe worthwhile to, I know staff have a lot of things on their plate, as they've already indicated tonight, but maybe at a future meeting to get somebody from transit to come here directly, Dennis Trudeau or
Dan Pierce.
Yeah. And speak to us, and they can hear our concerns directly.
Okay. Certainly with regards to, like I said, one of the questions or one of the statements that we would, one of the questions we would ask would be what level of service does Lantzville desire? Okay, so,
That may be a community thing that we have to ask.
Okay. Okay, next item. Similar in nature. Regarding liquid waste management planning services. Again, similar idea. There's a bylaw there running up against the cap, and they're looking to increase it. Off the top of my head, I do not know what the current budget is for this complete service currently. But they're asking for effectively the same idea. Councillor Hanks?
So again, is this the reason our sewer rates have increased by 120%? And what does that do to our level of service?
Okay, this Again, this does not create the budgeting process. It's an effect of the budgeting process. So when it comes to that side of things,
It's downloading.
well, it's not downloading. It's just the RDN requisition. They're not requisitioning from Lantzville district. Councillor Scott?
I believe this is, the regional district is required to have a liquid waste management plan. They have just gone through 2014 and had a new liquid waste management plan approved by the province, but it's a requirement of the province to have a liquid waste management plan. So I don't think the regional district probably has a lot of control over this. The requisition amount is increasing from 150,000 to 202,000, and I'm assuming that is for the whole southern community liquid waste management, or maybe everything.
I believe it's everything.
It's the whole
Doesn't
area.
care to negotiate offering certificates, screening normal French speaking use. That's all of them. Do note the proposed budget for 2015 is 163,000 in property taxes. So effectively, they're creating a room so they don't have to do this every year. Councillor Haynes.
Just responding to Councillor Scott, I do realize it is a mandatory function or requirement of the province, but like every other jurisdiction, they've got to get their costs under control. They just keep raising, and to just expect everybody to absorb it. And at some time, we have to say enough is enough. You know, their wages, the whole thing is just, and there's really, for us, there's no accountability really at the RDN. We're just a victim of whatever happens there.
While recognizing in terms of voting capacity, depending on what the issue is, we may have this effect or that effect, depending on the function. Okay, so again, there's a motion there. What would we like to do? Okay, well, just so you can defeat it, I'll make the motion the Council of District Alliance will condense the adoption of the bylaw and notifies the RDN accordingly. Second by Councillor Scott. Discussion. Councillor Savage.
So I think, these are two difficult things. But I would like to know what are the consequences? And we don't know that.
Well, I would suspect that when it comes to
the direct consequences that we contribute less funds.
No,
but is it a
meeting next time? No, let's deal with the two separately. On item 5B, the liquid waste management one, because it includes effectively all the participants, one party opting out wouldn't affect it. I believe even the same with regards to Southern Community Transit, but I have to check whether it's a weighted vote.
But we have to presume then that if we don't contribute, somebody else is picking up that tab.
But this doesn't change our contribution. It just changes, it just affects whether or not the bylaw that affects the limits is adopted.
Yeah.
And so if that bylaw that affects the limits is still adopted regardless of what Lantzville does, then we still get the bill based on the high limit.
So just so for clarification, we could have our protest vote against this, but they're gonna have the majority decision and they're gonna push it through and we'll still get the increase. Nothing will change, other than we've voiced our frustration.
Councillor Nolan.
As I understand it, the theoretical, let's assume that they do not get the 2/3 majority. The theoretical result of this would be that these programs would be looking at their budgets, and they'd have to go through exactly the same process that we have to go through at budget time, where we spent our time on since 5 o'clock, and the RDN would have to do their juggling act in order to determine, how they can best use the resources that they have without a 5% tax increase.
Councillor Miguel?
Thank you. Yeah, just looking at the wording of the amendment, I noticed it references a liquid waste management planning service. Yeah. It's not actually handling the liquid waste. This is actually planning to do something with the liquid waste.
We all like handling.
Yeah.
So thinking about it.
I'm wondering, given that it's a planning service rather than operational, I'm wondering if you had the information about what's actually driving what appears to be a cost increase.
Okay, in terms of the 2015 performance objectives, part of what they'll be doing is negotiating operating certificates for Greater Nanaimo, French Creek, and Moose Bay. Proceeding with Cedar and Bowser Village sewer servicing studies. That's all part of the liquid waste management plan, so therefore it goes against effectively everybody, all the participants. They offer septic smart workshops. They're planning on 4 for 2015. Coordinating meetings between the RDN and the municipalities to discuss commitments to the liquid waste management plan. Recognizing that there's collection services in various places. Monitoring septic quality or reporting on septic quality. And oh yeah, there was a regional liquid waste advisory committee, and that's being dissolved and establishing a new monitoring committee to monitor liquid waste management plan, benchmarks, metrics, that sort of nonsense. So that's their kind of 2015 work plan. Thank you. Okay, any further discussion on the motion to hold a protest?
If I can just make, Councilor, say something that can be like, I mean, it's really nice that someone wants to think about what to do with liquid waste. Like, I'm a big supporter of that. Yet at the same time, I find myself, looking at another more cost increase, and I'm wanting to send a message, but I'm wanting somebody to be in a good position to do something appropriate with the stuff. Mm-hmm. Is there any way we can support, because and when we presumably the better the planning, the less the operating costs if you're doing things right. Is there some way to support the concept but send the message that you may be aware of?
Well, I mean, I think the follow-up as a result of the transit one speaks to that. Let's say, we're not just against the cost. What we want to do is we want to look at the service and see if it can be done more efficiently within our area. I'm not really sure how we do that with the liquid waste management planning service side of things. But I understand the sentiment of what you're saying.
Do we know how much this actually costs for Lantzville? Like, we're talking at increasing from, we're spending a lot of time on this. We're talking for the whole region, it's going from 150,000 to 202,000. So it's an increase of $52,000 for the whole region of this current time. For all those on sewer.
That's 30%.
No, I understand that, but they're not necessarily going
what
to take.
Councilor Scott's asking us.
What's Lantzville's?
Lantzville share of the liquid waste management planning is proposed for 2015, $4,015. That's our share.
But it's the principle, it's cumulative, they just adding and adding.
Whereas, Southern Community, 112,000, quite a much larger number, but those Council Humans is the principal side.
Do we know what we were last?
3,867. 4,015, so it's gone up $133, $152. And so there's a motion on the table. Anything further? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? That one motion carries. Thank you. Okay, next item on the agenda is, on the amended agenda is the CIO's report, item 6B.
Ms. Mayor,
Oh, my mistake. Mayor and council verbal updates. Councilor Sally. Sorry.
Thank you. I attended the Local Government Leadership Academy workshop, 2 days, over 3 days, but 2 days in full. Attended all 3 days. Really enjoyed it. I know there's people in the community who think these things are a waste of time, but I learned a lot. I always do. Appreciated the networking opportunities, hearing problems that other communities are facing. One of the things that I came away with was the presentation on downloading, and it's significant and it continues. And it's a snowball that is difficult to get a hold of. And, but I enjoyed the session nonetheless. I also have to report that there's been no City of Nanaimo Parks and Rec Commission meetings since November. Apparently, the city are struggling to organize their committee structure, and so they've not made, well, I don't know whether or not they've made the appointments as I speak here, but as of last week, they haven't decided who's going to represent City Council on the commission. So it's 3 months without a commission meeting, so it's
Question on that, do the terms of reference state that meetings have to happen on a certain cycle?
No.
Okay.
They're more about recreation.
They're not skiing.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Haynes.
I also attended very briefly the LGLA conference. Work commitments dragged me away, but the part I did attend, I really did enjoy. Found the speakers very interesting. Gordon McIntosh, right? And so this is very good. I have a question actually for staff. Just a couple of residents have been in. One, they were wondering about the presentation by a resident in November with regards to Superior Road. When is that staff report coming? Do we know? There was a request for a staff report in November.
Is that the DCC one?
Yeah.
Added to staff's list of things to do.
Okay. And then another issue, so it'll just be on your CAO report, right?
I will add it.
And then one that I've actually had 3 residents come in to talk to me about is the dumping on Ware Road between Ware and Walls. I guess it's quite significant now, and there's quite a few animal carcasses in there. People who walk in there have actually asked me to bring it to council's attention. They're quite disturbed by the amount of dumping. Is there something we can do?
We communicate regularly with the property owner to go in there and clean it up. It gets cleaned up and people just start destroying garbage again. So it's an ongoing, someone bound to keep ahead of it.
It's quite bad.
Okay. Councillor Scott.
I too attended the LGLA conference. Very interesting. Learned some good stuff. Also had the opportunity to talk to Gary Padgett. He's a special advisor to the Deputy Minister. And I also met with Glenn Brown, who is with UBCM now, but was just recently with the province. And I discussed infrastructure grants with both of them, try and get information out of them as to Glenn oversaw the infrastructure program directly and is now overseeing the gas tax funding directly. So he's a wealth of information. So I had opportunity to spend quite a bit of time with them, and I passed the information that I got from them on to staff in hopes of making our applications better. I also met with Connie Fair. She's the CEO of BC Assessment. BC Assessment has some challenges in my mind, and I met with her with Jerry Wong, who's one of the councillors from the city of Nanaimo. And the thing we discussed with her that I was particularly leading on was, one is the assessments obviously change each year, and there's no direct correlation between assessments and taxation. So your taxes could go, or your assessment could go up, or your taxes could go down, or vice versa. So what I've asked for them to include is the amount that the assessment changes for the neighborhood, because they actually, with their system, they have down fairly tight neighborhoods now. So you can have the amount that the neighborhood increased over the previous year, and the amount your assessment notice has increased from the previous year. So you can do a comparison of yourself to what your neighborhood is doing. So if the neighborhood went up 10%, you went up 10%, your taxes are probably not going to change a lot. Versus if your assessment went up 25% and the neighborhood went up 10%, obviously there's a challenge there. So she said, oh, we have all that information. And I said, well, I know you do. I said, I'm asking for it to go on the assessment notice. And she said, well, there's no reason we can't do that. And that's what I also said to her, I know you can. So anyways, she said she's going to look into it. We'll see what happens. I also, a similar thing with businesses. I've seen quite often BC Assessment. I've had people approach me, and I've experienced it as well, that they do these special projects with businesses, and quite often the business assessments will all of a sudden start varying quite wildly because of these various projects. It becomes very difficult for small businesses because all of a sudden their assessment changes fairly significantly, which more often than not changes into a fairly significant tax increase. And basically what I've asked is that if they could phase it in over a 3-year period, the change, so that there's a maximum amount that could change in any 1 year, so that businesses can plan, because they can't budget it. You get the stuff at the beginning of the year in January, you're already into that business year, and you haven't budgeted for a huge increase in your taxes. So she said also they would look at that, so we'll see where that goes. I also had time to speak to a number of councillors in a group, and we were talking about secondary suites, particularly with Councillor Brennan from the city of Nanaimo. So I had some very good information about how some different communities were approaching the secondary suite process and how they have approached it. So again, if we move into that process, which hopefully we will in the not too distant future, we can draw on some of those resources. That's it. Oh, and I've met with the Seaside Community Association as well.
Councillor Colson.
Since we're in battle mode on budgets and economic sustainability, just take a few moments to share this. It's an article I saw in the Tyee, it's a website, and it's from 2012. The title is BC Cities Pay Top Officials More Than the White House Does. So it starts, Pity Jack Lew, President Barack Obama's White House Chief of Staff, the highest ranking employee inside the executive office of the President of the United States. Earning a paltry $172,000 a year, Lew's salary pales in comparison to George Duncan, Chief Administrative Officer of Richmond, BC, who pocketed a cool $267,000 in 2011 for keeping the lights on in that lower mainland suburb. I'll skip a bit here, and it talks about Lillooet, which I found interesting because that was the town where the benchmark survey we added our data to. It originated from Lillooet as part of a broader operations review they did. It says, in the town of Lillooet, the chief administrative officer is paid $120,000 annually to keep an eye on 2,322 local residents. Then jumps. Now compare that Lillooet salary to Obama's principal deputy press secretary, Josh Earnest, described by the Washington Post as a key member of Obama's message team, who makes $123,000 a year at his White House gig and is perpetually a slip of the tongue away from igniting an international incident.
Councillor Mormon.
In light of the time, I'll do my report in another meeting.
Councillor Newgray.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief as well. Just I want to reinforce what Councillor Hames said about the trail between Ware and Wiles. Yes, I'm aware it's cleaned up periodically. It's at a particularly disgusting state right now, and as the weather dries out, it's going to become a fire hazard or more of one. And I also attended the LGLA training session. I found it very, very, very informative, and I'm glad you all paid for me to go. Thank you.
For myself, just because it was a topic of discussion earlier, and I have the information here for us. In terms of the RDN side, as mentioned, the current increase regarding District of Lantzville is at 5.6%. It was at 7.2%. A couple of the reasons for the increase, separate from what we discussed earlier. One is the second component of the contribution to the Island Corridor Foundation under grants and aid. Part of that, half of it was collected from the residents in 2013. 2014, there was none collected, and then 2015 is the second component of the agreement between the regional districts and the ICF. That will then disappear in 2016 unless there's some change in heart on the part of the board as it stands right now. Other areas of increase, as mentioned, the increase in Southern Community Transit. With regards to other forms of waste, as we mentioned before, solid waste management has seen a fairly good size increase. One of the biggest reasons is a decrease in revenue. The fact is, with all the recycling and that sort of thing, the tippage fees have dropped quite substantially. So the fixed costs are still there in terms of running a dump and that sort of an aspect, but the revenue is not there even from the commercial haulers and that. There's some question as to where that waste is handing out. Some of it's going through recycling, some of it could be going down to Washington State. So that's another piece of the increase. Mentioning dealing with liquid waste or wastewater, reasonably good increase there, basically 4,100 out of 59,000. So let's just kind of throw about 6% increase plus there, closer to 8% increase. That's related to the changeover moving towards secondary treatment. As it's being implemented, operating costs will be increasing. So we'll continue to see increases in that over the next little while. So like I said, the current state of the budget as of a week ago, we're at 5.6% for the Lantzville portion of it. Okay, CAO's report, February 2015 report from staff for council's information. In terms of it, questions, comments, clarification needed on the part of council? Received by Councillor Hume, seconded by page 48 of your agenda, by the way. Seconded by Councillor Colson. Discussion. Councillor Colson.
So this is where I questioned earlier if there was a table or an inventory of items in progress and the status update. That would be awesome.
Page 50, 51.
This was strategic plan related though.
No, not specifically. It will be more up to date once you get the strategic planning priorities, but a number of items get captured in there.
Okay.
Further comments, questions, clarification needed? Councillor Scott?
Just a comment, for residents are probably aware, the Foothills property is now implemented security up there to prohibit motor vehicles, which I think a lot of people would be very happy to see. There's a lot of ATV traffic in that, and a lot of them with very reckless speeds. Having walked up there myself, just go for a run over a few times. I think a lot of people would be quite happy with that, other than the ATVs.
Any further? Councillor Scott?
Just one other question to staff, for you to staff. The ministry or group is meeting regarding the, I assume the Ministry of Transportation is leading this, regarding the traffic problems we've had on the highway over the last while. We also had another incident on Sunday, I guess, where traffic was not totally stopped, but it was getting backed up a little bit with the car that flipped by the overhead bridge. Is there any way that council can have some input into the draft plan or review it or some such thing? Because I guess my concern is that, not that I don't believe staff are capable or anything, is I think some political pressure may be necessary, and I'd like to assist if have council assist if possible, because it's having a huge impact on our community, and I think it needs to be very, very clear that we would like to see something done and not just have sort of a review and come up with some very, very minor changes. That we're looking for some real concrete actions to be taken.
Yeah, and in speaking directly with Jonathan Tilley at the ministry, I'm sure they would welcome that support. In particular, some of these strategies that they're looking to implement are costly, so they're going to be looking for support to have those budgets approved by their appropriate areas. So I will have that conversation with them, and if we can have some input on the finalized and maybe some support from the council perspective, especially might be appropriate at UBCM this year with meeting with the minister. That's helpful. But in all, they are working on it, and they are focused, and there are measures that they're focusing to put in place immediately that aren't cost prohibitive at this point.
Awesome. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of the motion to receive? Opposed, motion carried. Gets us down to the January 19th Committee of the Whole meeting. There's first off the minutes. Motion to approve the minutes. So moved by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Savage. Thank you. Discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. There's some recommendations that come out of that Committee of the Whole for consideration. The first one relates to the operating and capital carry forward amounts noted in the Committee of the Whole staff report. And then also recommendations to direct staff regarding the allocation of any carry forwards previously allocated to parks, trails, and journey ways. So what does council like to do with regards to the operating and capital carry forward items?
You want these dealt with individually?
We're trying to deal with them all as one, unless somebody wants something specifically pulled out. Councillor Negrete?
Okay, so I move that council direct staff to include the operating and capital carry forward items noted in the Committee of the Whole January 19th, 2015 staff report regarding 2014 carry forward items for consideration, and further, that the committee provides recommendation to council to direct staff regarding the allocation of remaining carry forward funds previously allocated to parks, trails, and journeyway plan initiatives. And further, that staff, that council instructs staff.
No, we'll do that one second.
Okay, Roger.
That's all right. Seconded by Councillor Savage. Okay, discussion. Councillor Hain?
Okay, just again, going back to our discussion at the COW, the Committee of the Whole, does it still leave us the option of looking at the big picture as we go forward? You know, we're sort of throwing all our eggs in a basket. We're seeing how many there are before we make final. Now, these are capital, so they're not as big an issue, but.
Yeah, I mean, you mean in relation to the financial plan?
Yeah.
Well, until the final approval of financial plan, everything's technically on the table.
Okay, so we still got time to look at it all. Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Now we have the water main replacement project tender.
So moved. How's that? You agree?
Which is instruct staff to proceed with the 2015 water main replacement project tender. Seconded by Councillor Negrete. Discussion? Councillor Colston.
With this leak we have, does that impact kind of the schedule of water main replacement at all? Or I got an email that there was an issue, but I didn't hear them extensively and so forth.
Yeah, no, there's no impact on the project. It actually is project timing is going to find ways better.
Oh, okay.
Any further discussion?
Well, just, I want to support this. I think Councilor Scott made a good comment. The sooner that we get these things going, the more likely we are to save some money on it. So it's a good idea to get moving with.
Okay. Any further? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Which gets the Parks and Rec Commission meeting minutes. In terms of it, there's playground equipment program 2015 priorities. So coming out of the meeting minutes are some recommendations with regards to what council should do.
Excuse me, sorry, Your Worship. Staff handed at your tables a chart. Yeah, that somewhat might provide a further explanation to all these items. So staff is happy to go through that with you prior to the council considering the motions that are on the agenda.
So one quick question to staff.
What's the difference between that one and the other one that we had in our?
Well, we just thought we'd provide it for clarity because there's different directions coming out of the Parks and Recreation Commission that council hadn't contemplated. So it's kind of a rejigging everything, and as I say, Jenna will walk you through that information.
The question I have is the schedule based on the existing plan right now, not based on any motions that may come out of tonight's meeting?
I believe those have been captured in the update, and that's what Jen is willing to speak to while you contemplate these motions that are on the table. It gives the full financial picture as it relates to the Parks and Rec.
Okay. Jetta, do you want to speak to the schedule here?
Sure. I'll just be brief. The top smaller one really reflects what was in the 2014 to 2018 financial plan as it relates to the carry forward balances to various initiatives. And so if you look in the 2014 column, there was a surplus carry forward to 2014 initiatives of $36,000 and leaving an additional $8,000 of new taxation last year. In the carry forward report that came to council at the last committee of the whole, those initiatives were brought forward as to the status. Were they complete? Was there monies left over? So I just wanted to provide some context of what the 2014 financial plan showed. Similarly, the 2015 column showed what council last year approved for 2015, and that also was reflected in your carry forward report at the last committee of the whole. I'll bring your attention though to the last row in the 2015 column. What that showed was that the Parks and Rec Commission had identified approximately $107,000 in Parks and Rec initiatives. $42,000 of carry forward was allocated to those initiatives, leaving new taxation or other funding sources of $65,000 required for those initiatives. Council last year didn't address how each of those might be specifically funded, so that's really what the Parks and Rec Commission minutes have tried to do, is give their priority assessment of these various initiatives, including trails and playground equipment and others for 2015, for 2016, and then beyond without assigning some years. And so they provided their priority chart within the minutes, and council has that. So if we then move to the larger spreadsheet, in the top left corner is essentially the chart that was provided in the carry forward report last committee of the whole meeting. And immediately to the right where it says PRC allocation requests for their January 29th, 2015 minutes is really to show how the Parks and Rec Commission, and you'll see their motions forward, would recommend to council how those carry forward amounts are handled or reallocated as the case may be. And so you'll see in the furthest left column of that, the total allocation requests show that they still want to move forward with the $9,000 of woodlot trails, the $2,000 of parks interpretive signage, the $35,000 of waterfront protection initiatives, although they suggested that be spread over 3 years, 2015 to 2017. The public information regarding parks and trails in perhaps the form of a map of $3,100. So the Parks and Rec Commission, and you'll see in their motions forward, have suggested to council that those be allocated into the financial plan as they are. So the one thing that they suggested not be carried forward was the $15,000 with respect to the preserved tree character initiative. So that they're recommending to council is not carried forward. So what that shows is there's $49,000 that they would recommend gets carried forward into 2015, 2016, and 27 in total of that potential carried forward of $65,000. Also in the far right column of the large spreadsheet is their priorities on each of these. So I've presented them in the order that council received them in the report, but you'll see along the side that they have assessed a 1 to 9 priorities for 2015. So those are shown also for your information. The bottom listing shows other initiatives that they recommended to council within their priority listing, including the playground equipment, the $25,000 that has been in the financial plan, in the capital plan for a number of years. However, they are suggesting there's likely another 45% minimum needed, so that would bring the cost to $37,000. They've suggested reallocating what was previously shown as monies for Fernmar Road Trail of $39,000 and reallocating that to the Mountain Bike Skills Park in Rotary Park. Then there's a number of other items, including Owen Road, increasing the budget that was previously shown from 27,000 to 33,000. And then going out into 2016, trail construction on Wilson Road, and then playground equipment for toddlers. So that would be in next year's budget. What I wanted to then illustrate was all of those initiatives that they've requested in their priority sheet, which is included in your package. So for 2015, 2016, and 2017, total $201,000. The carry forward that is left from prior year's taxation is about $65,000. Now that could be net, if we took off the $15,000, might only be $50,000, depending how council chooses to treat that $50,000. So funding needs to be identified for $136,000 approximately of Parks and Recs initiatives that they've identified for the next 2 years. In addition, beyond that time frame, there is about $150,000 in initiatives identified in their priority list that are in progress, that are out a few years, that haven't been allocated to any one specific year. So what I would like to offer is that there's a couple different ways to look at this. One is the Parks and Rec Commission has prioritized these 1 to 9. So, you know, the carry forward could first be applied to that in terms of priority order. It could be applied to the more operational costs at the top, and other funding sources be considered for some of these other initiatives, including, I mean, increasing property taxes is one of them, but other opportunities exist within reserves, possibly within DCCs for projects that are eligible. And there was also a suggestion that perhaps there's community groups, say the Rotary, that may want to be involved in any of these initiatives as well. So I was just trying to bring some context to what has been taxed in prior years and what is available for carry forward as compared to what the Parks and Rec has prioritized as their projects for the year. And so I think just to provide you some context in going forward in terms of reviewing those motions for the Parks and Rec Commission, and then ultimately what will be reflected in the 2015 to 2019 financial plan at council's discretion.
Okay, so speaking to all of this, at the Parks and Rec Commission meeting, we did go through all the projects that are sort of on the table at this point in time. In the long-term planning, we've had playground equipment for Rotary Park scheduled for 2015 at $25,000. There is a memo that was a report put together by a couple of commission members, which is an excellent report identifying our playground needs for the various age groups. This item, in reviewing all of the playground equipment at $37,000, we really couldn't identify any playground equipment for $25,000. The biggest issue we're facing with this Rotary Park is, according to staff, the MIA, Municipal Insurance Agency, has told us that we have to replace this playground, that it's now currently not meeting insurance standards, is that the word?
Not meeting CSA.
Right. So this one is a bit of a struggle for us because it's outside of what was budgeted, but it's sort of beyond our control, and it is something we need to be on side with our insurance. Now that funding, I would suspect, would come out of capital. It's obviously already in capital, so it wouldn't impact taxes directly because there's already reserve capital in the playground. One we've also put on here, which we are content or would consider moving forward a little bit based on our workload, is the Owen Road of $33,044. We could move that forward a year or so, so that would help. So that those two numbers alone bring down our budget by $70,000. So when you look at these two big items, they look huge, but once you understand the context and that there is a little bit of movement there, then you see that it's not as ambitious a budget as you think. One issue that's on this on our work plan that I think the commission members are favor very strongly is the woodlot trails. We have been negotiating with the province to bring forward a management plan for the woodlot trails. And so if that gets approved this year, which we're very hopeful it will, then this will allow us to start building some trails, getting some bridges in, and make that a really usable trail for all residents. So that one is a huge initiative for the members, and they would really like to see that going forward. The other one that they've been working on very aggressively or strongly is the mountain bike skills park in Rotary Park. They've been soliciting and getting feedback from the residents in those neighborhoods. They're looking to hold town hall or public meetings to get more feedback. But the feedback is this is something really exciting and new that we don't have in Lantzville, and really you don't see it in Nanaimo too much. It's in the south end. So it is an initiative that, again, the commission members are hoping council will support. One thing to note in the report you'll see for 2016 is the playground equipment for toddlers. One thing the report writers and commission members acknowledged is we've really sort of designated Huddlestone Park as the park for the very young children. And we have nothing for that younger age group. There really is no playground equipment for that small group. And so if council is interested in meeting that group of residents, then we need to basically budget for a piece of equipment down the road that'll meet their needs. So that's to kind of give you an idea. The Waterfront Protection Initiative, that one we're hoping to bring in some guest speakers for the community is what we're looking for there. Again, piggybacking on the Tualatin Beach program. Just so people can start hearing what's happening out there with regards to waterfront protection, rising sea levels, all of those sort of things. The public information parks and trails, there's been a real demand and request for our trails to get on the website. So we're trying to get our trails up on the website so people can see where they can go and walk, get some formal maps together. So these are the initiatives, and most of the other items are pretty small. But those are the key initiatives that the commission members would like to focus on for 2015.
Okay. Councilor Colson.
Part question, part observation. Out of our strategic planning session, and I forget the exact wording, but the top rated priority amongst all was to do with trails. I forget exactly how it was worded out. Did the Parks and Rec group get a chance to reflect on that, and are we kind of in alignment with potentially this top priority strategic item and what's happening with Parks and Rec?
Well, from the citizen satisfaction survey, the commission members know trails are a big priority in this community. We're a very outdoorsy community. They have not had the strategic planning stuff yet because it hasn't come to council. So they haven't had an opportunity to see what that feedback's been. But basically, just from past feedback they've received and from other documents, basically our goal is to try and link the community through trails. You know, we've heard council members speak to a trail between Upper and Lower Lantzville. Well, that's definitely something we'd love to do. You know, that is why the Peterson Road Trail went through. Yes, we're using an intersection, but that's all we have at this point in time. So our whole goal is to connect the community so people can get out there and move around without using their vehicles. And that's what we're trying to do.
Councilor Milbank.
I had some difficulty with one of the motions, which presumably we will get to because I'm not quite sure what it means, but it says the council approved funding for Parks and Recreation Commission 2015 priority projects during financial planning. So, you know, we've just gotten some of this information a couple of hours ago. As some members of council may remember, the way that the Parks and Rec budgeting process is designed is, I find it very, very challenging because there's been a lot of accumulated monies, accumulating since 2008, which we call carry forwards. It's money that has been taxed and not yet allocated to a project. Those, you know, we've been gradually trying to make it through that money, and as things currently stand, you know, to use the carry forward term loosely, there's $65,000 that has been taxed in previous years that has not yet been spent. The Parks and Rec Commission, I believe they understand their projects best. They know which projects need to get funded. So I'm certainly not, you know, I'm not going to second guess whether it should be North Road Trail or Woodlot Trail or whatever it is. But I can say right now that I'm going to be paying attention to where exactly the funding for these projects is going to be coming from. I'm in support of the ones that have been identified as coming from Parks and Rec reserves, I agree that there needs to be a replacement of the parks equipment, possibly the mountain bike skills park. Improvements can come out of reserves, but especially given that that we've been gradually over the past 3 years working through these carry forward projects, and in light of the budget discussions that we've already had over the course of the evening, I'm going to be disinclined to vote for anything that is going to increase the bottom line of taxes to the residents, simply because there is already this pool of money available, and I think that there's only so much that the commission can do in the course of a year. My last point is the Woodlot Trail project, which is something I remember when I first came to council with a long report written by Mr. Gullison. That's something that I've been looking forward to seeing the end results of. If there are hang-ups because of staffing at the district or approvals at the ministry, then certainly I'd encourage the commission to avail themselves of the political influence of the district, and maybe some motions, adding a bit more oomph to that might move it along.
So just following up on that, the commission members have been working diligently on all of the projects. For the most part, we've moved forward with most of them. Just like council, commission members are restricted by how fast the provincial government moves. We've had many members contacting the province directly themselves and MLAs to apply political pressure. And as we also experience here, they experience the same setbacks. So I'm sure we can appreciate the struggles that they face. The biggest thing to recognize about this budget, though, is there are costs in here that are outside of their control, such as that playground equipment. It looks like it's increased. It's the product of the Parks and Rec Commission members, but it really is the playground equipment cost. We are required by the Municipal Insurance Authority to replace it. So really, I question whether that should be part of our budget, because it's outside of what we have to do it as part of our mandate, but really it's not one of our top priorities, other than that it's got to be replaced.
Councillor Scott.
Just a couple of, I guess, questions and comments. First off, the Woodlot Trail thing, I'm really pleased to see that that's moving along finally. I think a lot of people would be very pleased with that. Just regarding the process, though, I'm somewhat confused, because we have, from the Parks and Rec Commission, we have basically budget requests coming in, and then we go through, from what I can see, there's a process, and it's like a consultation process with the community to see what the community wants and how they want to do it. So I'm a little confused at how can we budget things when we don't know what we're actually putting in. It seems like we should be doing it the other way around. We need to go through and do this, the phase, if I'm following this correctly, we need to do the phase 1 and process, and then in phase 2 we determine what the financing requirements are. But to my way of thinking, if I'm understanding this correctly, we need to go through the phase 1 process, identify what we need, meet with the public, go through, determine the space that's required, as this says, the activities provided in each park, et cetera, the theme, number of activities, those types of things. Then we can determine what monies we require and how much, what needs to be put in. I mean, we've got requests here, but maybe 10,000 more we require, maybe $10,000 less. Am I understanding this?
Well, what we have been doing that for the last 2 years is working through the public process, which is how we've come up with the quote of 39,000. If you're talking about the mountain bike skills, we've talked to other park clubs who've given us sort of that ballpark of what it's going to cost.
Right, but I guess the question I was having, okay, that's that one, but we've got the Rotary Park and the, it looks like it's going to be down Huddlestone Park, 2 different playground projects.
So that's next year, 2016.
I realize for the Huddlestone one, but for the Rotary Park is this year, is it not?
Yeah, and it's the 2 components. It's the playground equipment and,
Right, there's two separate items, but has the playground equipment gone through this process?
yes, we've been working with the residents on that, which is how we've identified the age group we're looking at, because we've had feedback from residents in that neighborhood who've asked us. They basically have come forward, said they've got daycares, they've got younger children, so that's what we've been basically directing the playground equipment at.
Well, I guess I was confused with the talk about the town hall meetings.
Well, we still want to continue a public process. You know, basically, every step of the way, the Parks and Rec Commission members want to encourage the public to get involved, make sure we're on the right direction that they want to go in.
And one other question, just on the Huddleston one, I realize it's 2016, so that it doesn't have to be Delta bring up, but we're targeting 18-month to 2-year-olds. Isn't that a pretty narrow age group? Like, I mean, 6 months, why aren't we doing like 14 and a half to 15-year-olds? You know, it's such a narrow age group, and you know, the number of kids I would think in Lantzville at any one time in that age group is going to be fairly small.
Yes. But the purpose of the report was to identify to council where there is a gap for what age group is missed. So if council says there's too few residents in that age group, we don't want to buy a piece of equipment that specifically targets them, then fine. But basically, we wanted to bring it to the attention of council.
And one final question. Wilson Road, I don't think it was in the recommendations from, so I don't know if it was missed or in the actual Parks and Rec minutes.
Is there any chance of that? It's just an item that's been. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, carried forward. So that's Wilson Road, which contemplated for 2016, right?
No, it's in 2015.
There was one in the items.
$1,200.
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm looking at phase 2. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I'm just not familiar with the processes that have gone through to date, so I was just confused when I see this process here.
Okay, Councilor Colson and Councilor
Just
Miller.
to further take my Councilor Scott, on page 60 with the 18 to 2-year-old segment, I think that was sort of the target start range perhaps, because a few sentences down it refers to an 18-month to 5-year-old age group. I think that's where, that's probably the age span you're targeting there, not a 6-month window. So you're further down.
Yeah, it's just sort of basically what they did is they went. Yeah, they looked at all the equipment and all the parts.
Yeah.
Councilor Miller?
If I could, to staff, wouldn't some of these normally be included in our special request list? You know, for example, I'm thinking, well, why isn't, like I said earlier, I am struggling to deal with these because it feels like it's in somewhat of a haphazard fashion, and I'm reluctant to approve, to make a decision on some of these because I don't have the special request that says where it's going to be funded from, so I don't know if, you know, although if it's possible, by all means, I'd like to fund some of these items. I just don't know what the funding source is going to be.
Yeah, I think that, well, one, I guess they are somewhat like special requests, except that it's come forward as a priority list, and council is looking for direction from the Parks and Rec Commission on those carried forward items and their priorities. That said, with respect to funding them, it's really at council's discretion. Each year, we've kind of looked at these Parks and Rec items differently because there's been that carried forward amount. Now, we are getting to the end of that, and I think that as a matter of process, it'll be more similar to the other kind of departmental special requests. That said, there is kind of, council needs to look at the carry forward, and then what I've done at the bottom of that schedule is provided some other alternatives for funding those. So it's kind of an all-in-one special request type thing in terms of providing some alternatives to council that they may want to consider for those items.
And then kind of along the same vein, you know, we're dealing with this at a council meeting, although we've already had 2 financial plan CAL meetings. So wouldn't it have made more sense in terms of permitting us to juggle our various different responsibilities to put it in a CAL meeting?
Well, except that typically the Parks and Rec Commission reports to council and brings forward their minutes and their recommendations, motion forward as a matter of process and procedure comes to the council meeting. So that was the reasoning behind that.
Okay.
But it could certainly be, you know, at the next committee, the whole be part of that whole discussion.
Okay, and then one last point, which is unrelated, is it seems like we've skipped over Mayor Hames. It says verbal update 6AI Foothills, 6AII.
That got moved down, I went down to unfinished business and one item of new business in the agenda. Councilor Negri.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess throughout all this, dealing with some of the niceties, the one overriding matter or thing that's impressed on me is that although we do have, you know, a certain amount of carry forward monies available, there's still a very significant amount that we'll be looking to fund for this list. And also on my mind is the fact that we're going to have to be, this is going to be in competition to some degree with requests from protective services, i.e. the fire department and their big list coming forward. So I would really like to see these dealt with together, because I think rather than dealing with one big consolidated list and then a bunch of individual items, we should be dealing with them probably on an item by item basis. And that's not to say that I don't disagree with anything that's listed here. I respect the input of the Parks and Recreation Commission, and that they know the Parks and Rec scene better than I do, but we do have to make decisions on scarce funding. So I would like to see them dealt with together. I don't know if we need a motion to do that or not.
Well, there's no motion on the table at all right now, so councilors will what they wish to do. Councilor Scott and Councilor, sorry. Is there any further?
Yeah, I'm done. Thank you.
Councilor Scott, Councilor Coulson.
Yeah, I agree with what Councilor Maker is saying. The question I have is the washroom at Huddlestone Park. It doesn't show up with, and that's where I'm a little confused, is the process with it, how it fits into the whole picture here, because we have, it's tied in with parks, but it doesn't show up in any of the park stuff. It sort of shows up independently, so.
No common works issue.
I think it was a special request item that we tabled.
The other comment I have, and I don't know if there's any consideration when we look at this, but when we expand all of these items, there's also a maintenance cost, an ongoing maintenance cost with these. And I don't know if Parks and Rec looks at that, because it does impact the Parks and Recreation budget, which impacts the overall budget. In that, you know, if we do put these things in, how much do they cost to maintain years? I mean, that's one thing that a lot of, I won't even say necessary municipality, I think companies get a lot of challenge with is there's one thing to capitally purchase something, but there's the ongoing operations of these items as well. And I don't know if that's been looked at in any of these items. General question.
My guess is no.
Well, most of these are, some of them are to do reports, some are replacing existing equipment. The woodlawn one, we've actually had residents say they'd like to volunteer to maintain the woodlawn trails. So right now, we haven't spent a lot of time on that because we're just trying to get some direction from council. Basically, the commission members are wondering, what is it that council wants them to do? They've made their list and now they're waiting for feedback. They just basically, we gotta know, what do you want to see accomplished?
Councilor Coulson and Councilor Negri.
One question from staff, is the funding source possibly gas tax credits? For Parks and Rec equipment or trail building or anything, I guess, in this list, gas tax credit. Okay. Second one to Councilor Negri's point. Yeah, I concur, but I think we also have to roll that up to all strategic items. So, you know, that could be fire department, Parks and Rec, planning time for secondary suites, village core improvement. You know, we've got to look at all those strategic items and determine where residents want the money to go. plan from there.
Okay, Councilor Nugent.
Thank you. Okay, so I would like to make a motion here. And it's going to be referring just to that bottom item under section 6D, not the items above it. So I move that council refer the question of funding to the Parks and Recreation Commission 2015 priority projects to the next committee of the whole meeting in a manner that is comparable to other special requests and strategic items.
I'll second.
Okay, second by Councilor Morvay. Discussion. Councilor Nugent.
Yeah, since I moved it, I'll speak to it. So what my intention here is to do is not to, basically, the items mentioned above about the playground and some of the two other items for capturing carryovers, I want to leave them available for us to vote on in a moment. But these other items in the priority project list, I would like to see them go forward to be to be considered in conjunction with the other funding pressures that we have, so that they can be compared with other pressures for our scarce funding.
Councilor Haynes.
I certainly appreciate and hear what Councilor Negre is saying. One thing to note is under protective services and every other function at the council and in the district, they have a base budget. We have no budget. This is all we have. So if we do nothing here, that's great, we all get to stay home. So that's something to think about with regards to the Parks and Rec Commission. They start from zero, and every year we start from what do we get to keep the commission going. So when we look at our budget decision, other than Mine Town Day, which is a line item, we really work on projects. So if we don't do a project, which is fine, it's council's discretion, but we need to think about that when we try to line them up with the fire department, because we don't have a base budget.
Yeah, and I accept that. I think that's a valid point, but I think we do need to be able to compare some of these projects with others. I'm not saying no to them. I'm just saying let's have a venue for a more I hope an objective comparison.
Just a question to Councilor Nugent, maybe through the staff or to staff or otherwise. Is the expectation to have kind of special request summaries for each individual item prepared, including identification of funding source, or is the expectation the chart here, or
certainly what you suggest about having alternative funding sources identified would be helpful. Some of these may be able to be rolled together. Some of the smaller items, if they can be operationally delivered, with some synergy together. But in general, I would say, particularly some of the bigger items here, like the mountain bike skills part, I think that warrants a separate report on its own.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Staff, adequate direction?
That's fine, thank you.
Thank you. Hearing no additional discussion, all those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Okay, now, Councilor Nugent, you did make mention about that motion, and you talked possibly about the other three items above that.
Yeah, what my intention was is that as it was laid out with recommendations for consideration, the first three items seem to be considered separately from that last item. So I was hoping those others could be voted on separately at council's discretion to separate the three from the one.
Okay. Well, certainly council can do that. I guess where I struggle a little bit is that the first three items are in fact part and parcel of the schedule itself. So I kind of view it all as one referral to the committee of the whole, as opposed to making decisions even on those three items. Any other input from council? Okay, so we'll leave those other three for part of the budget discussion. Councillor Scott?
Question, should we move receipt of the report?
We should probably move receipt of the report and I believe the minutes as well. Yeah. Moved by Councillor Scott, second by Councillor Haynes. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. keep that one up. All right, that gets us to under unfinished business. It's the item that, one of the items that I added to the agenda, or requested being added to the agenda. Previously, when we had the motion a meeting or two ago with regards to the planner side of things, the motion was made by Councillor Colson for all the hiring of a planner. Some individual members on council criticized me somewhat because I had raised concerns about it with staff, but I hadn't added it to the agenda or provided any sort of report. When Councillor Colson's motion came up, some councillors felt somewhat blindsided. When it comes to the standpoint of the foothills aspect, the previous council has approved a memorandum of understanding, and there's some wording in that memorandum of understanding. The parties would like to amend the development plans that were previously agreed upon by the former owner of the Foothills Lands and District. The parties agree as follows: modified agreement. The parties will execute and register a replacement agreement to the covenant that is currently registered on title. Another item, parties agree that the modified agreement will be drafted and registered by the district's legal counsel. So with regards to that MOU, there appeared to be very specific direction being given. But I do note that also in the MOU there was also a line, parties acknowledge and agree the district's ability to enter into the agreement are subject to the approval of council of the district, which approval is subject to council's absolute unfettered discretion. What my concern is when it comes to the standpoint of the MOU, first off, there was questions raised in the public with regards to consultation that had occurred in terms of moving forward to the MOU standpoint. But on top of that, there's also expenditures related to legal fees, et cetera, and preparing the documents as directed in the MOU. So I thought it would be prudent for council to have a discussion with regards to the MOU, discussing specifically, in my opinion, whether or not to hold any sort of a town hall meeting with regards to affected residents or otherwise regarding changes to the existing Foothills development agreement, or possibly whether or not to consider changes at all. There are items included with the MOU that I myself have some real serious concerns with. Some of the items, for example, revolving around freezing on zoning, some of the things in the previous covenant that spoke to fire underwriter survey and traffic effects. Some of the items mentioned in the newly executed MOU speaking to allocation of water connections, albeit at council's discretion. So like I said, I put it on the agenda, giving council the opportunity to speak with regards to where it is they would like to go with this, be it in terms of public process and or whether or not the items within the MOU are items that they would like to consider. Councillor Negre.
Thank you. Well, I'd say, generally speaking, the whole idea of foothills is one of the bigger, if not one of the biggest topics of, public discourse in Lantzville. And, concepts were developed some time ago. Some conditions have changed. Generally speaking, for something like this that has the potential to very much change the character of the community, I think there can't be enough public process myself. So generally speaking, at this point, I like the idea of perhaps some sort of information session or public open house to advance the matter.
Councillor Scott?
Just a couple of things. You commented on legal fees. I believe it states that the developer would basically cover all legal fees for the district.
And with regards to our budget discussions earlier, when the question about the $50,000 amount that we budgeted in legal fees, there was somewhat of a question raised as to what was recoverable and what wasn't in terms of it. And also, from my standpoint, if it's a case that even if it's another party incurring legal fees, if there isn't the will of council to pursue changes to the agreement or that the proposed changes don't match up with what council desires, I'm not in favor of any party spending legal fees, be it ours or the Foothills.
So just to continue.
Yep.
And I agree, that people shouldn't spend money unnecessarily if there's not clear direction. But in the MOU or the letter that's included, it does, basically, it has to go through a whole public process. And it does talk about, and I know there's been, of course, the ownership changes in that, which initially clouded the waters, but it talks about basically having public information meetings and of course, they're in public consultation. And of course, if they're looking at OCP amendments, if we're looking at phase development agreements, if there's any zoning changes, which I don't believe there's zoning changes, but all of those things have to go through full public process. It has to all go to the community and go through public hearing.
Yep. But as I mentioned, if it's a case that the MOU conditions as agreed to, if you want to call it that, between the parties as it stands right now, is not something that's acceptable to council, I believe it's incumbent on us to do that now. To kind of go back to our very first council, back when Ian Howitt was here, we got criticized by Mr. Howitt for not raising concerns about issues in a timely fashion because we knew there was process later where we could address that. So what I'm suggesting is that we have this consideration and discussion and some public input now rather than waiting for later where further down the road with regards to the process. Councillor Hayes?
I have to support Councillor Nigger's comments. I think he's right on the money. This is a huge issue in this community. I think it set a big part of the results of the election. I think a lot of people are very concerned about this. One thing we seem to hear on an ongoing basis is that staff are very scarce for time. So why would we go through this process and have them spend a lot of time and a lot of taxpayer money if at the end of the day the residents don't support it or they want to see some sort of changes to it? So I'm going to actually throw out a motion that we move that council have a town hall meeting on Tuesday, March the 17th to discuss the next steps with the Foothills MOU and put all spending and costs on abeyance until then.
Please second for Councillor Coulson.
So, question. So, the zoning, the rezoning, this took place in 2007, correct?
Yes. Well, I believe that's when it was registered.
And that was a public process. I remember I was involved with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did we actually go to the public at that time and get the public's feedback on the development of the MOU?
219 covenant, yes.
Now, keep in mind that the concept of the foothills itself, including densities and that, actually went, and the allocation of those densities, actually went back to the OCP process in 2005, a very public process.
And that was all a very public process, but I'm specifically referring to the memorandum of understanding. Did that go to a town hall meeting or for public input?
I think
To
section
honest,
219.
The actual covenant itself, I don't believe the covenant did.
Yeah, my understanding is it did.
Yeah, but in terms of the terms and conditions that were encompassed in there, it was a result of that OCP and public process that created that. Whereas now we've got an MOU that speaks to moving density from one area to another. We've got an MOU that speaks to getting rid of things like Schedule B, et cetera, of the existing covenant. And it has not had public process.
Okay, and then just to follow, so the issue of the density boundary change, it doesn't impact the project. There are still two access points. There's one off Lycon, one off Howard Drive. That's it. So the fact that the boundary changes on the line isn't going to affect the impact of the community in terms of, it's the number of units which is a significant impact to the community.
But I would suggest in terms of those units themselves, the location of those units does potentially impact it. As an example, when we were going through the OCP process, and I call it the blobs drawings, where it had the various pods of development, one of the reasons for some of that configuration revolved around viewpoints. It revolved around, I wouldn't necessarily say cultural areas, but areas of use of residents separate from residences themselves. And so that as well was that public process of creation of that. The number of units based on this MOU does not change, but the location of it does, and therefore the potential impact on the greenlands, if you want to call it that, does potentially change. Councillor Hain, then Councillor Meagher.
Just to follow up, and correct me if I'm wrong, but theoretically, if the Foothills property owners choose not to change the layout of where the density occurs, then there really wouldn't be a change to the OCP, is that correct? So then we wouldn't require a public process. So theoretically, we could skirt around the whole public process. And there hasn't been one on this. Basically, it came out on September the 8th. It was approved in camera. The residents have only had the opportunity to read about it online. They've had no opportunity to question council about it. There's some significant changes in here. We're taking out requiring a traffic survey. So right now, am I correct? Study. So theoretically, those are big changes which they may not get a chance for a public process if they don't change where the density occurs. So the fact that they should have that right to speak to it, I think is a really fundamental issue. And there's a whole bunch of them on Schedule B that have been removed. There's been no public process, and theoretically, they may not get a public process. So I think they're entitled to it, and I'd like a recorded vote, please.
Question. Proposed to be removed.
Yes.
Nothing's been removed.
Yes, correct. And that's why I say correct me if I'm wrong.
Councillor Meagher, Councillor Scott, and Councillor Milbank.
Actually, I didn't indicate, I was probably just squirming, sorry.
Oh, Councillor Scott.
Yeah, I guess with a lot of this stuff with the moving around, it's my understanding, and I may not be totally clear on this because I haven't seen a map with the new information on it. But are we not just more, the same amount of parklands being given? Is that not correct?
The number of acres, correct, or hectares.
And it's in the same location, is that not correct? Because we're not, from my understanding, there wasn't a rezoning application per se, it was an OCP application.
No, as of yet, there were some attempts, I believe, at some rezoning aspects, but I don't think it ever carried through.
Yeah, so just for clarification, not attempts at rezoning, there would be an OCP and a zoning amendment if the proponents were willing to shift the 140 acres that used to be, as Mayor Hain referred to, as blobs in the middle of the park, and move that density into the 590 acres that was defined in the UCB. So resulting in a more cohesive park, because you would be taking out 5-acre, 140 5-acre developments potentially. So again, not increasing the density. Just because of making that movement, you would be required to amend the zoning bylaw, because the zoning bylaw incorporates the again, reference the blobs in the middle of the park at this point.
Councillor Milbank?
I have no difficulty with the town hall meeting on this. I think it probably is the right time. I do take some significant offense to the characterization of the agreement. The MOU, so it's a memorandum of understanding, it states in it, and this is the legal effect of it, and this is how developments in other communities work, and in fact, contracts work frequently. It says the parties agree that this MOU is not binding. Basically, as far as I understand this process, you have to start somewhere. So in general, and others with more experience in this area can correct me, council tries to take a look at the situation and tries to think of what the best case scenario would be for the community, and there's the back and forth that goes on, and then that gets hammered down into an MOU. I also disagree with Councillor Hain's characterization that it would be possible to skirt the public process because the foundation of the MOU is this density component. And what I understand to be the flip side of that equation, which is the contribution of $7,945 per dwelling unit. So, I don't think that the fear mongering that has surrounded discussion that took place during the election. I prefer to see that not continue into this council term. I would strongly be in favor, as I said, of having a town hall meeting, but I think that we can, leave that behind and move on to talk about the nuts and bolts of this and put it to the community, which would have will be required, and obviously it's not something that can be avoided. With respect to my perspectives on this personally, this project goes back well beyond my time on council. I remember when it came up first, and this is not generally the kind of development that I would be in favor of. I don't particularly like developments that involve residential sprawl. My focus, especially after being involved on the village core community, I would vastly prefer to focus on having more development in the areas closer to the core, because I think it's important for the commercial businesses, which creates tax spin-offs, and it's good for the kind of core components of the community. Unfortunately, in my mind, the zoning was granted long before my time on council. So the right to develop that property exists, and that is not something in my mind that it is possible for us to take away. We've got legal restrictions, specifically in Section 911 of the Local Government Act, that mean that a person that has been granted that zoning is going to get grandfathered in. So this development, one way or another, is permitted to take place. We can't, it's private land. We can't, now that the zoning has been granted, which happened in 2005, 2007, I'm not sure what the year was, this has been kind of bubbling along and burbling along, to refer to the water components of it, for quite a long time. Maybe this is when it's finally going to come to fruition. I really don't know what my end perspective on it is going to be, but certainly it's the kind of situation where I'm going to be forced to hold my nose, because there's not much I can do given that the zoning is there, and try and get what I think is going to be the sort of development that is going to be most beneficial to Lantzville.
Councillor Coulson?
I like the motion. It puts actions to our words. On the public process component, we've got some recent experience with that with our water agreement. Some would say that public process was questionable. So yeah, we schedule a meeting, get residents involved. I like the fact that about pausing the spending, it's a good piece to add. You spoke to some of the deficiencies earlier. One of the key ones that I reflect back on the 2007 MOU was there was language in it that was basically an escape clause, where at 120 units or something to that effect, if council didn't like the way it was going, we had the ability to modify, change, get out. And so those are some of the deficiencies that I think we need to talk about. The ship may have sailed on zoning, but we can still develop a MOU or phase development agreement, I guess, that protects residents. I go back to the 1,000 cars an hour from the traffic study. That was horrifying in my opinion. But we got to talk about that.
Okay, Councillor Scott.
I guess one of the things I'm looking at is we're discussing this tomorrow night with our legal counsel, and I really hesitate making a lot of decisions on this before we have that information. I agree with the public information. I don't have a problem with that. But I don't agree with setting a set date before we check with staff, before we check with the proponent. I think everybody involved in it needs to have some input as to what an appropriate date is. But I think we should, at this present time, not go any further and table this until we get information from our legal counsel, because there may be legal implications. Because I don't know, I don't have that information. So
There's a motion on the floor.
I'm speaking to the motion.
Oh, okay. I thought you were putting on a new motion.
No?
I guess my question is that a motion to table?
Yes.
Okay. Are you a seconder for that?
Yeah, I'll second that one.
It's seconded by Councillor Savage. It's a motion to table the scheduling of a public information session, or town hall meeting, whatever you want to call it.
Recorded vote?
Recorded vote's been requested. All those in favor of the motion? Councillor Savage, Councillor Scott, opposed? Councillor Negri, Councillor Monique, Councillor Coulson, Mayor Hayman, and Councillor Hayman. Motion is defeated. Any further, Councillor Scott? Okay, Councillor Hayman.
So I just want, no one is taking away the rights of the property owner to develop. There is right now a CDA on that property. They can certainly develop under the terms that are there. Nobody is saying they cannot do that. And the community did go through the big process of the OCP. They set out what the terms were, that they were accepted. And what we are now is we're looking at an MOU to change that. And that's the part where I believe that we need to involve the residents. This is a significant change. Some of them are significant changes from that previous registered 219 covenant. So that's why we need that input before we go much further.
Councillor Savage.
And I hear that. The last council made the decision. As part of that decision, we were provided with information in terms of the prior MOU and the current MOU and the benefits and positives and negatives, if you want to call it that. And if that forms part of the, well, I would hope that that would form part of the public information session.
Okay, there may be some required motions in order to do that.
No, I'm sure staff will provide that as part of the session.
Staff's abilities might be somewhat limited based on the in-camera nature of some items. Tom?
So if staff could just comment on a couple of things, and I hate to be repetitive, but our staff plate is extremely full, and to meet a deadline due March 17th to hold a town hall type meeting would be extremely challenging. That's also the week of our audit. And leading up to March 17th is we have regular meetings of council every Monday evening, so just the general agenda preparations and the work that comes out of council meetings. Adding to that, I would look to council to consider having the developer be responsible for holding the public information meeting, with of course staff being present, so compiling the relative information. Given that, the motion includes that staff do not expend any additional monies as we move forward on this particular issue. Also, I just want to comment that our community planner starts on the 23rd of February. Delaying the date and allowing staff to look at an appropriate time to schedule that town hall type meeting would be more appropriate once our community planner comes on board and familiarizes herself with the extent of the development proposal.
Okay. Just a couple things with council's will here. Mr. Holland. Hi. Suggestions have been made of a public information meeting, a town hall meeting to be held by council on March the 17th. Availability?
Technically, I believe we probably can do if your worship and council. It is a short time to prepare for the amount of information. I understand that there's quite a bit of history here, and the way to have that conversation, I'd very much like the privilege to get some further advice on that and how to do that and how to ensure that conversation ensures that the community can come are fully briefed on all the issues, on the rationale behind things, on the current reality. The previous vision that was out there was 10 years ago. It was a very different world in the development industry and Lantzville 10 years ago. And we'd like to ensure that the time spent for a community to come and spend a whole week and talk about it, and yourselves and your staff, is really, really productive. And so if you will allow, I appreciate the chance to work with your staff and come back with a proposal for an actual process of how we can lead to this so that you get what you need from that conversation. If that would be a request, just respectfully.
Okay, so just a question with regards to that consideration of process. Is that including a different date or in terms of processing working towards the March 7th?
If council or wisdom declares that date as the date, we will work very hard to make that date. I would respectfully request a little more time, but that's entirely at council's discretion.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Negri.
Thank you. Would suggesting changing the date be considered a friendly amendment?
To what?
What do you think, April 17th?
Sure. If that works on the calendar.
Oh, should we ask, Mark?
Mark Holland.
Would a 2-month period be adequate for your preparations?
That would be much better.
So if I could make a proposed friendly amendment and change the date of the town hall meeting to April 17th, or the nearest Tuesday too? What would that be?
Sorry, if staff just interjected, I know where council would like to target this timeline, if we focus looking at scheduling something the second or third week of April, if you can leave those dates with us.
Yeah.
It's difficult, this is my private calendar that I have in front of me, so I don't have all council's scheduled business already, and, yeah.
So it would be the second or third.
Second or
week of
third week of
April.
April, if I could target that, that would be reasonable.
Okay, hang on. Mover, who's the second?
Rob.
Councilor Gregory.
Oh, no,
Hang
sorry,
on,
no,
let's
it's-
just,
I'm moving the friendly amendment.
okay. You guys acceptable for
Actually,
friendly?
Councilor Coulson was the second.
Oh, the second, sorry, Councilor Paulson, you're acceptable to the second or third week of April? Okay. Councilor Scott.
We've also, as part of that motion, said staff not to spend any dollars, which would include staff time.
Well, I meant legal.
Then it's gonna be clarified, and
Okay.
that's what it is, because otherwise we can't do anything.
Right.
Okay, if we want to go friendly again?
Right.
Getting along?
Legal. No phase development agreement or basic.
No additional legal.
Yeah,
So this is for the developer to prepare public.
yes.
Hold on. Content of the public meeting are still. The direction was for the council, the district, to hold a public meeting. Councilor Hain, Councilor Coulson, when costs were mentioned, was your expectation outside costs as opposed to staff time and
Yes.
preparing for something?
That was my understanding.
That was my understanding.
Okay. Actually, I'm just going to say a couple of things here. Councilor Negrave made some mention about concepts in the past. There's a lot of discussion that went into the original crafting of the crafting original covenant related to the foothills itself. Many meetings, a lot of concern about traffic raised, options looked at, possibilities, and concerns. I view some of these items as relatively substantial changes in terms of those conditions. With regards to the density side of things, one of the reasons for, or one of the benefits of that splitting of density would result in additional green space or open space even within the UCB, because of their relatively limited ability to develop, which would create those green spaces. For example, the previous owners of the foothills spoke with regards to larger lot sizes, but covenants upon the ability to change the landscape, right? As opposed to green lawns, there was an expectation of more items to be left in their natural state. Quick question to staff with regards to zoning. My understanding is zoning is at the discretion of council. If there's somebody is doing basically they're not in compliance with zoning on operating because of history or whichever, those are typically grandfathered. Does council have the ability to change the zoning on the property as it stands right now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, so it is with our discretion. Not that I'm suggesting we do that, I just want clarification as to our abilities.
So just so I understand, so we wouldn't require a public meeting to change the zoning?
Yeah, you need public hearings, the whole shit. Last comment, just with regards to who should hold this meeting. Personally, I believe that it should be council, it should be the district holding this meeting. Certainly does not preclude the attendance and participation of the proponent. In bringing up this issue, in my mind, it's us going to speak to our residents and listen to feedback of our residents. And the proponents certainly will take that in as well, and I'm sure take that into consideration in terms of the future process. That's it. Councilor Scott?
I'm a little confused, because were we not asking the proponent to hold the meeting at one point, and that was part of the reason for the time?
There was in my mind, the time aspect was the participation of, not the individual holding the meeting. Certainly, my expectation would be participation and expression of desires, plans, that sort of an aspect on the part of the proponent to get full information. But at the same time, I believe we have a responsibility as council to go out to our residents, and that was the intention of the town hall meeting style. Okay, anything further on the motion? So everybody clear on the motion?
That's recorded.
Trudy's not.
Read it out, so the council holds a town hall meeting in the second or third week of April 2015 regarding the foothills development and further put all actions resulting in outside costs and advances of that.
That encompass intention? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion?
Just a question on,
Yes.
Staff will be obviously at the meeting. A lawyer crafted, for the most part, the memorandum of understanding. I would suggest that the lawyer should be present at that meeting also.
Certainly there can be a discussion with regards to staff on the availability. Yeah. Mr. Holm, yes.
Thank you for the privilege. Your worship, council, we are prepared to cover all outside costs on this process, so there would be no costs or time related to your staff. In most communities in BC, small ones, it is customary to have consultants that are essentially paid for by us, completely covering all the kinds of things like that. We're quite open to that process. That includes legal, it includes planning, includes engineering wherever necessary, so there would be no costs for your staff and time as well. We have some concern that if everything is shut down and locked down outside of that, it greatly hinders our ability to prepare for a good public, a wholesome public conversation, move anything forward at all. That would be our only concern with respect to the implicit, or my understanding of the motion that stands.
Well, the motion itself speaks to the district not incurring any additional costs. The way the words is held in advance.
Yeah.
Is that the words used, Trudy?
Put all actions resulting in outside costs in advance until then.
Just for clarification though, if our lawyer were to be in attendance, if that's something council's contemplating, that's an outside cost. Well, the only thing is I get concerned if you're covering our legal.
Councilor Colson, and then we'll.
And where do we capture an offer like that? Is it, should that be in the MOU, or, how do we capture that kind of thing? So
Spirit of goodwill.
No, really, though, that's kind of a contractual relationship almost around it. So
If they sniff us, that would not bode well.
Any further questions, guys?
No.
Councillor Scott?
As a suggestion, maybe the proponent could put that in writing in a letter to the district.
The district?
Yeah.
Just a suggestion. Okay. Okay, recorded vote has been requested. All those in favor? Everybody. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you for that. And thank you, Mr. Holland, for your comments. Which gets finally to new business. First item, 2015 holiday season office closure. The motion, suggestion of council approves the closure of the district office. 24th January 1st. Moved by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Meadrake. Discussion. Councillor Haynes.
I have two questions to staff. One, if this is passed, can staff work if they choose during this time?
Typically, it's the outside individuals that are on call, so they work inside staff.
So they can't if they want to. Okay, and can they also choose whether or not they use their vacation time for this?
Yes,
Okay, so they can just take it off of their, okay.
but it's without pay then.
Yes, that's right.
That's correct. Okay.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carried. Now we're to the big dollar items. Sewer Phase 3 grant.
They would have disappeared when we can spend $6 million.
I want it on the wish list.
Okay. Sewer Phase 3 grant. Basically what it is staff has been preparing our application under the New Building Canada Fund Small Communities Fund grant program with regards to applying for Phase 3 sewer in the magnitude of approximately $6.6 million. Basically they're looking for direction on council that once they've completed the application it can be submitted prior to the deadline of February the 18th. Councillor Scott.
I move the council elect not to, or alternative, sorry, what do you alternative?
Yeah.
The council directs staff to proceed with submitting a new Building Canada Fund Small Communities Fund grant application to the BC Ministry of Community Support and Cultural Development in Phase 3 of the District of Lantzville Sanitary Sewer Collection System, and further that the district's share of the project cost will be subject to the establishment of local various service on council initiative, subject to petition against.
Second by Councillor Newgrave, thank you. Discussion, Councillor Scott.
Two questions on this. Is through the staff, being that it's a fairly large sized project, is it broken, I think this might have been asked once before, but broken down into phasing, can we usually phase so that we could, if the ministry comes back?
Yes, we do have it broken down in phases.
And the second question, again, through the staff, one of the things that I had spoken to specifically with the people from the province up in Parksville at the LGLA session, environmental. So, you know, again, suggestions to be included that the industrial park again is on septic, and that is a big environmental thing. And the secondary thing to that is there's potential for redevelopment of the industrial park area, and also that those areas sit basically the Winchelsea area and the industrial park right above our aquifer.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if there's some focus on those things, that was certainly the direction that I was getting from the people who approve these applications.
And where staff are able, if I can just comment, we are incorporating that language into the application.
Awesome.
So.
Perfect.
Okay. Councillor Coulson and Councillor Savage and Councillor Miller.
I'm assuming this application is well underway.
We're still working on it.
Because it's due in 2 days, correct?
It's due on the 18th at 4 o'clock.
Okay. Does council typically get to review these applications before we're approved?
Typically, no. Council in the past has not received the completed grant application.
Okay. So I have a question on the phasing then. So the schematic we have shows one large area, 307 lots. How is that broken down for staging?
So I didn't bring up the larger version of the map, which I should have. I've got a phase one. I don't know if you can see it. You can pass it around. Right now it shows what was essentially left out of phase 2 when we were asked to scale it back. And then we have the industrial area, and then of course we have the upper Winchelsea area.
Can you also get copies of these?
Yes. So they may allow us to move forward with the Chelsea area and move off the larger waterfront parcels on the, who knows? They may just say we have ample money and we're not going to ask you to consider a reduction. Difficult to say.
How do you present it with a series of options or phases?
No, we always go forward with the complete application. And in the past, the staff at the ministry have phoned us to ask if we can scale our project back.
Councillor Savage.
Actually, my question was answered by the drawing that we had, because the first drawing, the catchment area was slightly wrong, but this one revised it. So.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Milbank.
My only comment is that although obviously it's important to have appropriate sewer for the residents who live in there, certainly that's the most important component of this. One of the items that I think is particularly important to the district in terms of our tax revenue is servicing the industrial area. I can't quite find the page at the moment, but our industrial park contributes a significantly larger amount of money simply because of the tax rate for industrial properties than residents do. So the industrial park has been somewhat neglected in terms of servicing and attention over the years, and I think that this component of the project would be important in terms of not just the expenditure side of things, which dominated the conversation today, but it's equally important to focus on the kind of revenue that you can bring in. So if we can improve the financial viability of the industrial park, I think that's a great thing.
Okay. Councillor Hain.
Just a little confused, because two things. One, I thought we were ready to go in October with regards to our sewer grant application. Did something change?
The applications are always different. We have made an application in the past for phase 3, but the funding program has changed, as do the questions. So it's always a matter of you can't just submit your previous application. So, and we're making some changes to the application process based on feedback from Councillor Scott, and yeah, providing some additional information that we didn't in the past.
And we have a number of property owners in phase 2 that have not connected yet.
We have about 4 or 5 properties outstanding.
Do they find out about that? Because isn't it a requirement of the grant that everybody connects?
It's not something that's asked in the application itself. As I said, we have 4 or 5 properties that haven't physically connected yet to the system.
So are we gonna?
I would bring that to the attention in the application. They don't ask the question.
No, but as a council, are we gonna move forward with trying to get the 100% compliance?
That will be up to council.
Up to council.
Absolutely.
So will we get notified of the properties or?
Yes, we can in the future. That's
Council can get that information.
As I said before, those individuals are paying the capital costs. They're not paying user fees, but they're not connected to meet those user requirements. These are items where people are experiencing financial difficulty, other challenges, and at this point, it would be the district staff going on and physically making those connections and forcing those monies back onto the homeowner. So they're a little bit sensitive in that regard. The last 4 or 5 that are outstanding.
And I totally respect that, and I do worry about them, but I also remember the property owners when we did phase 2 that came forward to council with the same concerns, and we forced them to connect. So, and they took the money to.
Phase 1.
It was phase 2, because he took them to the
Phase 1.
ombudsman.
Phase 1.
Phase 1?
Phase
So I just, it's fairness and consistency for everyone.
Just one concern I do have, and I recognize in the past, we got the phone call that said, can you scale it down? At the time, one of the individuals involved provincially was Glenn Brown. And Glenn Brown, we had met with numerous times prior to phase 1, between phase 1, phase 2, et cetera. And to put it simply, he got the issue. And we had a really good working relationship with him, and I think that precipitated some of the phone calls. I'm a little concerned based on the scope of it and the size of it, and there's always a limited pot of money on the part of the government of not somehow identifying, and you don't want to say, gee, we could cut it down, because that's giving them the right to cut it down without question. I just worry about not getting that phone call and effectively getting a yes or no. And I don't know how to address it, I'll admit that, but it's a concern I have.
There is a part of the application that asks if it can be phased or if it's divvied up, so we can respond in a positive that says yes, that opportunity exists and see what happens.
Okay, so that's going to be answered as yes?
Yeah.
In terms of it, I don't know what we'd effectively do, recognizing the 1, 2, 3 aspect. In my mind, we've got to kind of do 1 before we do 2 and do part of 3. But like I said, it is a bit of a concern. Councilor,
I believe this is a federal program and we fall within a newly delineated federal boundary, so perhaps the risk isn't as substantial as you might imagine.
Fair enough.
That's true to Councillor Niggard's comment, but the challenge that we have is that it's the province that divvies out the money, not the bets. So the province has control of the purse strings. There is also other funding that's upcoming under the gas tax funding, which is actually substantially more money than is put in this infrastructure program. And as staff rightly pointed out, these programs, in talking to the people that I spoke to, are continually changing. So, and that was one of the reasons I spoke to them, is I know the requirements are continually changing, and as to what their priorities are, and each of the programs has different priorities. So you need to basically tailor your applications to the particular program. So everyone we do will have, for the same thing, will have additional costs because the program's different. As staff pointed out, different questions, different priorities. Just one comment up on the Winchelsea area. I do live in the area, and have had quite a number of people ask me about sewer up in that area, so there definitely seems to be a strong interest in it. And I've also spoken to staff, and they said they've had a lot of inquiries as well. The Winchelsea area. Yeah, there's been a lot of interest up there from residents. And there has been a number of septic fields that have been replaced very recently in that area.
Which leads to the dilemma that we run into when somebody comes up and grants a year, or construction's a year out, with septic fields filled, so yeah, we have run into that. Okay. Any further? Okay. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion carried unanimously. Which gets us to item 9C on the amended agenda. Again, I put together a memo with respect, in this case, what's to be considered in public meeting versus in-camera meeting. When it comes to the standpoint of the agenda is technically council's. It's not the mayor's, it's not staff's. The location of items on an agenda is in itself up to council. Although quite often there is consideration of what has been decided between council and staff, or between mayor and staff. Basically, I want to give it some structure. When it comes to the idea of what's in camera and what's not, as mentioned kind of in my report, historically, one of my observations, and I'm not identifying anybody specific or even here versus RDN or otherwise, there tends to be a better safe than sorry approach to some things. Putting stuff in camera that kind of fits, and with regards to it, it's kind of like dealing with tax laws. There's gray areas. So you try and figure out, okay, is it deductible or not? Well, it depends on how you twist it in that respect. So I've come up with some recommendations to give us some guidelines to possibly incorporate into a policy. Recognizing a split between the idea of operations planning and policy direction as opposed to receipt of legal advice. And it's not meant to be a one catches all type of a solution. And it does have some wording with regards to other actions that can be taken or other considerations that can be taken to make sure that, again, similar to some of our previous discussions, that items are documented as to why an item is in camera and in that respect there. This is not the same as our previous discussions. Our previous discussions revolved around reporting of things once they were in camera. This deals with some additional considerations on whether or not things should be in camera and giving it, like I said, some structure in terms of it. So I'm looking for feedback from council, whether there's a desire to create that consistency or not. Councillor Novak.
I think Councillor Scott's hand was up first, but I'll take it first. I think it can. I'm strongly opposed to this. I think it's dangerous for the municipality. I accept the intent behind it, and this will be, I've certainly been in favor of all the other measures that we've undertaken, successful and unsuccessful, in order to bring things into the open agenda. But the line certainly needs to be drawn with respect to receipt of legal advice. I took a look at I read the memo carefully, and there are some components of it that I agree with. I did agree with the comment that sometimes, there's a temptation to take politically sensitive items and put them in the in-camera agenda, but at the same time, politically sensitive items also sometimes involve legally sensitive items, and it's dangerous to put those items on the public agenda. I can see that there's a distinction that's being made between one category, operations, planning, and policy, including receipt of legal advice, and that should be automatically in the open agenda. I can't support any policy or motion or council direction that puts legal advice in the public agenda right off the bat. The other category is the receipt of legal advice on existing specific identifiable legal issues or agreements that have not yet been finalized. And then there's a process that's set up for determining how those may go into the in-camera agenda, but more or less the default is that should be the subject of a council discussion. I pulled out there's a recent case that came out just to underscore how important this is, that talks about the receipt of legal advice, which the technical term for it is solicitor-client privilege. So that kind of information has among the highest protections that are known in the Western legal system. And just a couple of days ago, the Supreme Court of Canada said the following. They said the core principle is that solicitor-client privilege must remain as close to absolute as possible if it is to retain its relevance. This means that there must be a stringent norm to ensure its protection, such that any legislative provisions that interfere with the privilege more than absolutely necessary will be found to be unreasonable. Certainly there are situations, and we've had them, and I would continue to look critically and with an open mind on every particular information that comes across. There are situations where it is reasonable and appropriate to disclose legal advice into the public agenda, but the district council has a responsibility to avoid liability, and our potential liabilities don't get divided up into these categories. For example, if we had a long-term contractual relationship, which I assume would be an existing specific identifiable legal issue or agreement that has been finalized. As I understand this policy, that would automatically, if we got legal advice on it, that would automatically go in the public agenda. But what if that contractual relationship isn't working out? What if there's been breaches of that contractual relationship? What if there's been allegations that the district has breached that contractual relationship? The community charter identifies particular subject areas, for the most part, that are potentially protected from being discussed in the public domain, and I think that's the way that we should continue it. I think, even that our insurers may have a problem with this kind of policy because they often take over our legal matters, and they certainly don't want their interests as our insurer, supposedly looking after our legal interests, to be jeopardized by legal advice getting discussed in the public agenda. By all means, sometimes these things can get put in the public agenda, but the first stop needs for legal advice, in my view, because we're dealing with potential liabilities for the district, should always be the in-council or in-camera agenda.
Councillor Scott.
Along similar lines with Councillor Moore, I have some really serious concerns. I agree that stuff that should be out in the public should be dealt with in the public. First off, I strongly agree with that. I don't have a problem with it, but I think when we start categorizing these things, we say operations, for example, that everything's going to be dealt with on the open agenda. Well, there is situations where operations where we may require a pipeline or a reservoir location that will require either an acquisition or an expropriation, or those things need to be dealt with in camera. Those are not public items to be dealt with when you're negotiating. Likewise with, I think, if we have QP negotiations, it's an operational thing. I don't think we should be having our negotiations in public. It's like having a one-sided negotiation if the other party knows everything you're going to do and how you're planning on dealing with it. I don't think that's in the best interest of the community. So I think those types of things we have to look at, that we have to keep those in camera. We've already come up with some policies around our in-camera meetings, releasing minutes, albeit it's not happening right at the exact time, but like Councillor Milbank, I think when we're getting legal opinion, we have to be very, very cautious. And stuff like that, you are better to be safe than sorry, in that there's a liability for the district, and we have to protect that. That's what our job is to protect the liability of the district. Again, if we were having a contract issue with for use of an example, Winley, and it's going to go, potential litigation or whatever. Again, it's an operational issue. We're saying if we develop that type of policy, that stuff has to be dealt with, basically in the open meeting, and I just don't think that is appropriate. The other thing it talks about too is about getting legal opinions. I think whenever we question something, we have to get a legal opinion. Yes, there's a cost to it. There's a cost to doing business, but and we need to follow that legal opinion, because we had this discussion with our solicitor previously, and he said that if we don't follow professional advice, we are personally liable. That's what he told us. So, I think we have to look at two things: the personal liable side of things, but also the liability to the district overall. And also, council owns the agenda. As you said, we own the agenda. If there's something that we don't think is appropriate on there, we can move it into the open meeting from the closed meeting. So council already, it's their agenda. It's not staff's agenda. Staff prepares the agenda, but it's council's agenda. We vote on it. And if at that point in time, when we vote on something and we don't think it's appropriate for it to be in camera, we can have a vote on it. It's a democratic process. And as I say, the other thing that's happening now is we are also getting staff to put on the in-camera items the specific reason why it needs to be in camera. So it's very clear as to why these items are now going in camera. So I think there's a lot of checks and balances in place. Is it going to be perfect? No, because I think even coming up with policy, what I'm trying to point out is the policy, there's too many potential exceptions to it, and we can't identify those. So I don't think we can be constrained by that. I think there's other ways that we have of dealing with it, and I can't support it this time.
Okay, Councillor Hayden.
Well, I think it's an excellent idea. I think the community is craving some transparency. We've got to get stuff out in public. Right now, the first recommendation isn't saying that everything be in public. It's telling us that staff are going to identify the risks to the Lantzville residents, and those agenda items will still go in camera. That process will still be followed. But basically, right now, there's a feeling, and in my opinion, a large number of items are dealt with in camera that really don't need to be there. The staff create the in-camera agenda, and then what happens is, sure, we can vote on it, but we're already in camera. So it's kind of convenient to just stay there and deal with these issues. We don't always get them out, and that's the problem. And that, I think, is what the residents are feeling, and part of their frustration is we need to start doing the business of the district in public so the residents can hear it. That is good governance. And we've talked about good governance, and governance is transparency and accountability. They have the right to hear what's going on. Yes, if there's something of a risk nature to the district and to the residents, absolutely, let's put it in camera. If we're negotiating QB, sure, we're going to put it in camera. But to just automatically throw everything in camera because
that's not.
No, I get that. But basically, I think we need to take the other approach. Let's start the other way first and say everything should be out of in camera unless we identify the risk to the resident. Then it goes in camera. That's the approach that I think the community wants to see, and that's, in my opinion, the direction to see a lot of the communities heading in.
Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, for the council's closing comment there, I think change the perspective. Keep everything out unless we truly identify it needed to be in. And I think to the strategic plan session be a kind of example of that, where typically it was closed and then just showed it open, and it worked really well. I like the memo, and I realize there are certainly things that have to go in camera, and not to go an exhaustive list of things where we've been deficient, but the point you make about the water agreement is a good example. And I know had it available, we did not. So I think changing the perspective and the approach is very worth considering.
Councillor Savage.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I won't support it. I won't be supporting it for a few reasons. First of all, it wasn't an item that was raised during the strategic planning. You know, it's just going to add to staff's workload. I think with the way we're doing business is not inconsistent with the way it's always been done. I know when I came on council, I was concerned about the number of in-camera meetings. And I know other people who were elected last term, they were concerned also. And from my experience, for the most part, 95% of the things that were in camera that we discussed at the last council, it was appropriate. And so I don't see any reason to change at this point. We've done some minor tweaking. I think that's enough to take us through, and I think you know, we have enough on our plate.
Okay.
Are you going to speak?
Councillor Nugent.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's some concepts in the memo I really like, and I support them. There does seem to be an issue regarding the presentation of legal advice that seems to be hanging people up. So at this point, I feel really uncomfortable voting for this memo and what it says in its present form. However, I think we might find that there's something we can all agree on more if parts of it are recrafted, particularly parts with those sections relating to the presentation of legal opinions in council.
How would you reword it? Hang on. What if I might ask, what if it was flipped around when it comes to the legal counsel aspect of it? Where when it comes to receipt of advice, and whether we talk about specifically identifiable or not, where if the initial thought, recognizing that section of the community charter, that on that sort of an item, that it was initially to be considered as an in-camera, unless an argument could be made that it could be considered in the public. Because if that's where the hang-up is, let's say flip that specific item. Okay.
So is that the motion?
I'm just providing a suggestion for discussion. Councillor Nugent finished, and Councillor Miller?
Actually, I think Councillor Miller was first.
Okay.
I think this doesn't actually, your suggestion, it doesn't require any change of policy. I think that's what we already have the opportunity to do. Right? We get in our in-camera meetings. We can look at the agenda. We can move those items into the public agenda. We can move those items, the information that we receive, the legal opinions that we receive into the public agenda, and we have done that. I recall the first substantive meeting that I had in 2011 was moving discussions with developers and other discussions that had happened in camera, out of camera, and we can continue to do that. I mean, we don't need a policy for that. That's the power that already exists, and I agree that we should be vigilant about looking at those specific items when they appear on our in-camera agenda to determine whether or not they should be there.
Councillor Scott and Councillor Dean.
As Councillor Bilbay points out, I think a lot of those checks and balances are already in place, and I mean, there's an argument that, well, we're already in camera. It's easy. Well, any one of us can make a motion if we oppose to it. So it's up to us to have that vigilance. And in most instances, if it's put off to the next meeting, it's not life-threatening type of thing. Maybe in the odd instance, it is life-threatening or something that has to be dealt with right away. That's a risk, I guess, we have to take. One of the things I was going to suggest originally, but I really hesitate doing it, is a staff report on it, coming up with some information. But we keep on giving, like, staff, like, we just keep on shoveling stuff. And, I would like to see staff give us, and I think it goes further with Councillor Coulson was saying, and it was also discussed a little bit at the LGLA meeting, but is in a, I mean, we have what Twyla gives us, the CAO gives us right now, but I think even a little bit of a just a block table, and it shows when we start making these decisions, it's pushing other things down the list. And this is what staff sees as the priorities, and those other things sometimes if we're saying, well, this has to be done right now, I realize I'm trying to go off subject here, but it pushes it down. But I'm not comfortable with this the way it is, and I think we already have a lot of controls in place, and we've already just initiated some additional controls in place to keep stuff out of the in-camera meetings as much as reasonably possible.
Okay, Councillor Hayman, then I've got some comments.
Yeah, I don't see it that way. I don't know, I guess I'm the longest sitting member of council here. I can speak to it, it doesn't come away that way to me. You know, in the last 3 years, I think there's only like 5 times we rose and reported. So we're not getting stuff out to residents. We may say we are, but then they only get a line. They don't really get the issues, they don't get the discussion. And there are topics that really they should be hearing the debate back and forth. They're not legal issues. They're really council because they're of a political nature. Well, that's what we're elected for, is to debate these issues in public. That's why we sit here, is we're comfortable doing that. So I think the way we're going right now is it's our way we get stuff in there and it never seems to come out. And this is a way to open the doors and get some information out to the residents.
Speaking that the system works, I'm going to throw out 2 examples. We've got an MOU for the foothills. Nothing about it, effectively. We've got a water agreement where there's clauses that speak to water to the winds. That's an operational planning and policy direction that has nothing to do with legal. Yet, again, it's one of those things that kind of all of a sudden was there. And in terms of the reasons why is it in there? Was that discussed in public? Yeah, after the fact. And so that's where this is kind of coming from. I get the aspect with regards to the legal side and that sort of a consideration, but there are neighborhood or community changing items that are not legal items that haven't been discussed publicly. And so giving it some structure so the thought process is there, and so that people have an understanding, and so the public has an understanding on what to expect is discussed in public versus what to expect in in-camera meetings. I don't see the danger. Like I said, I understand what you're saying with regards to the legal aspect, but like I said, there have been some failings. Hence the reason for the discussion. Councillor Scott.
But then that's council's failings. I mean,
yeah.
any one of council that attends those meetings can request that item be taken out of camera, and then it becomes a democratic process of determining, based on people's risks analysis, if they think it should be out of camera or in camera. As I say, I think there's, especially with the things that we've just put in place, we've talked, we are going to release in-camera minutes. We're developing policy on that right now.
But I agree, it's a council feeling, and this would be a council policy. My question then would be, why did it fail? The community charter's there. In terms of that, there's interpretations of it, etc. So why did the system fail if it's council's failure?
I was on council.
No, and I agree, and so I think the existence or consideration of a policy where there's a structure to it gives individual council members a greater opportunity to step back and consider it in relation to a policy, and recognizing policies themselves can be varied. You don't have to technically stick to a policy, but without that structure, there is a tendency on the part of individuals just to accept, in terms of, oh, this is in camera, okay. Whereas in this respect here, it would provide some structure to it so that somebody on council could say, we as a council agreed that items related to operations planning and policy direction should be considered in public. Why isn't this item there? So again, structure to it. Councillor Savage? No? Councillor Legre?
I just want to reiterate that, I'm hoping we're not gonna vote on anything tonight regarding this, and I don't believe we're compelled to, but I think you've heard some opinions on the matter, and I do think they could be constructively put into recrafting it into something more acceptable to council as a whole.
Okay, Councillor Folsom.
Again, like what you said, certainly past history across a variety of councils and other municipalities are struggling with this too. So would these be tools to help council be accountable, to themselves and ultimately to the residents? So if the policies are there and they're not being acted on, they're not very useful. So do we need to change those? I think we do.
Okay, Councillor Scott.
Just a comment on the policies specifically. Number one is we've already dealt with that because we had staff specifically identifying why an item is required to be in camera. And I think staff, from all of our discussion, would be pretty clear that what the expectations are. So we've already given that direction. Then, of course, there's the legal one, number two. But going to number three, I guess the challenge I have with that is the logistics of doing it. So we have a meeting, and we decide at the beginning of the meeting whether something should be, because it's debatable, whether it should be on the open or closed agenda. And we have, like tonight, we have 30 people sitting here. So what we're going to do is we're going to chase everybody out of the meeting room, have a separate meeting, and then invite everybody back. And I just look at the logistics of trying to do that, and I think it's a little bit challenging. Just my thoughts. And like Councilor Nager, I don't think we should be making a decision on this tonight.
Well, and in terms of decision tonight, there wasn't necessarily an expectation of that, recognizing that these are just recommendations, ideas that I put forward. Logistically, would that sort of a situation be a little bit messy? Sure, sure, no doubt at all about it. But personally, from my standpoint, what do? Do you wait until the end, then go in camera, and then say, oh, this can be considered in public, by which time the public will laugh?
No, move it to the next agenda, unless it's something that's time-sensitive nature.
Okay, so now you're creating exceptions. So
Well, I think everything has to have exceptions. I'm just trying to look at the realistic of it.
And I wouldn't expect a recommendation like number 3 to be coming up all the time. I would expect it needs to be something that needs to be considered at that time, and that's the reason for it.
And just to follow up, we already have, the mayor is already reviewing this with staff, so that's only in the instance of staff and the mayor disagreeing.
Yeah, which is what it says.
I guess, I just think there's.
Councillor Milvan.
I share Councillor Scott's concerns about the logistics. If, in order to force us to be rigorous about these issues, I would have no difficulty in the course of our discussions about the procedural bylaw, if we added it to our e-camera agenda. For each agenda item, that we would have a discussion about whether it should or shouldn't be in camera. I would be okay with that. I agree with Councillor Scott that the logical thing to do is to move it to the next agenda. And then my final comment is that, if there are situations of erring on the side of caution, it's because the stakes are really high. So if we're talking about multi-million-dollar transactions and situations where there is a serious risk to the residents from well-funded, well-heeled parties, then absolutely I'm going to err on the side of caution until things are, until I feel sufficiently confident that that risk is passed, and then I would be wholeheartedly in favor of putting it on the public agenda.
Sorry, I think it's great. I think I've DS.
Yeah, I think this dialogue's been healthy. It's been good. We've had a lot of input. I'm concerned about adding staff workload. we've put some checks and balances in place. You know, I think there's some issues being raised tonight that we're all more cognizant of when we come to considering in-camera items. I would like to suggest that let's run for 6 months here, and if you still have a concern, Mr. Mayor, then bring it back and let's have a go at it again.
Okay. Councillor Hain?
Just so I'm clear, has there already been times when there's a disagreement between you and staff or what's in camera?
Certainly, and this isn't just kind of considering existing time, but going back over the previous time. You know, as an example, there could be a case where there's a topic itself that has not been authorized for release by council itself, but that unto itself does not automatically make it an in-camera item, because there's legislation that deals with what may be considered in camera. And so if there's an item where, and staff is taking the route direction given by council, they've not received direction from council as a whole to consider something to be a public item. On the other hand, like I said, there is the community charter, and it is something that's very subjective. So there certainly can be and will be, I'm sure, possibilities of disagreement. Now, going back to what Councillor Savage said, I don't disagree with your suggestion. But what I will inform council of, though, is that in my thought process, in my discussions with staff as to what could be or should be in camera and what shouldn't be, these are basic kind of principles that I take into it. And so in that respect there, when it comes to an agenda, if there's something where there is that sort of disagreement, it is council's agenda, and it is something that would need to be raised in terms of understanding. So, and I'm not saying that you need to see my way, but effectively that discussion needs to occur. Councillor Coulson and Councillor Scott.
Yeah, so just on the event of a disagreement, there needs to be a policy on that, though, because it may happen, could happen. So right now, who has the conch? You know? What are the flies? Council. But we're not actually taking the agenda.
Well, no, but you do receive the agenda itself, and so when a council meeting begins, you know, like I mentioned in item 3 there, if it is something critical or something in that nature, there is a process of policy, and it may be uncomfortable for the people watching to say, sorry, get out. But the reality is that process is there, and we're making council aware that process is there. So in the event that there is either confusion or concern or whichever as to what should be in camera and what shouldn't be, there's a process to allow council to address it in a timely fashion if it is something time critical. Right? So it's not a case that I override staff or staff overrides me in terms of, but certainly like I said, disagreements can occur.
Just trying to get the timing on it too, because going back to one of the earlier discussions we had in an earlier meeting, just people wanting advance notice of things and so on. So, so now timing's jeopardized perhaps, or compromised.
Well, yeah, a couple things was just speaking to Councillor Coulson's getting up there. That's also something that happens if it's the meeting where we have to kick everybody out type of thing. Then people don't know that item is going to be on the agenda. So it may be an item that there is a lot of interest in, but people won't know it, only those people that are here. So again, unless, that's what I was saying, unless it's a real time sensitive matter, it should get punted to essentially the next agenda. I just want to say, I think this discussion's healthy. I think it's good debate, and we've already had some discussions on this. Hopefully we can take Councillor Savage's suggestion. I think it's good, and if there is issues that we are seeing, then yeah, I think we need to look at it and come up with something that's workable for everybody. But I like the discussion. I think it's helpful.
And thank you for the discussion in terms of this. So, anything further? Okay. Which gets us to public participation. Thank you very much for your patience. Sir, state your name and address.
I sat here for 5 hours and 20 minutes. In excess of that.
You want to switch chairs?
I never thought I was coming out for a marathon.
Yeah.
I did not. And I'm sure my wife feels it way past curfew at this point. However,
John, I'm
I
sorry
want
to
to
tell you,
catch
there's
your
no
minds
medals
back.
either.
Sorry?
There's no medals for this marathon.
No, there aren't. But I want to catch your minds back, and I'm trying to tell you how many hours ago to item 5 of the correspondence, item 5A.
Oh, yes.
And I'd like to thank Councillor Milbank for a common sense approach with regards to the public transit issue and the vote taken by council. Because I think that sort of thing is common sense to drive it way back up. Even though you can't make a change, you indicate you disagree with the province or the RDN.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Further participation. Councillor Parker.
Sorry.
Sorry.
You didn't hear too long.
Resident
Parkers, Harwood Drive. First of all, thank you for getting the application for the sewer going, finally. I'll tell you, I've heard from many, many neighbors, they really, really want sewer. I'm really glad it's not just when it comes to the in-camera minutes, I would suggest you get I agree with what John said, that invert the process. You have to justify why it should be in camera first and foremost, and that should be done first. Secondly, when it comes to democracy, it's expensive, it's messy, tough luck. And the reason I say that is I've heard some discussion about process, and I'm sorry, you're gonna have to try some experiments. You're gonna try being here 5 or 10 minutes early, or something like that, review the agenda. You're gonna have to try a few processes, and you'll find something will eventually work. Nobody's got the principle out there right now that works perfectly for this. You're gonna have to try and find out. When it comes to worrying about the workload of staff, I'm sorry, transparency comes first and foremost. The public matters. Everyone here works for the public. You have to keep that in mind. So if that means hiring a part-timer, yes, you just have to go through and look at that. Yes, you have to put the budget consideration, but transparency, accountability really matter. So I suggest you keep pushing ahead on this matter. I'm just going to speak from personal experience. As I reflect back, yeah, we should have probably released, there's a lot of crap. I'm going to call it crap in the old minutes, the in-camera minutes about what we did in some bylaw enforcement because somebody's dog was taken on somebody else's lawn or whatever it was, right? Somebody had a messy yard, all sorts of stuff like that. Frankly, that after this dealt with, I think people would be surprised. I'm thinking of one that was dealing with scrap metal in the yard that we went through for a couple of years. I think people would be interested, probably in hindsight, would be interested to know that, A, we were looking at it and dealing with it. But, that's the kind of thing people need to hear. You'd also be surprised with it. The nature and extent of complaints too. But I think there's a lot of stuff like that. But frankly, after you sit down, make the decisions, yeah, maybe you redact names. But frankly, really, I get the legal counsel issue, totally get that. Especially when you're gonna go buy land, sign a contract, fine. But really, there's a lot of that stuff could come out.
Yes.
Name and address.
Brenda Savage, Howard Drive. Can we have that podium moved over there?
You can have whatever you want.
Because she can't see.
Nor could I, college can disappear.
It's a
When you have a presentation, yes. Yes, fair enough,
Yes, thank you. If it was over here.
Yeah, it should be somewhere.
Everybody can see the presenter. And then I have another suggestion about the bus. We have a bus running through the village. We also have a bus running along the highway to Parksville. Couldn't we have that bus running through the village?
We don't pay for that.
We don't pay. We don't pay for
I'm
the
not sure if it's
Parksville bus.
included in our numbers or not, the miles.
Is it not?
Don't think
What
it
a
is.
shame,
That's like an
because
express.
two buses running the same direction both ways.
Their express buses paid by Parks and Recreation.
It's meant to be express.
So it's theirs. Okay, well, that would work then. That's it. I think that's it.
Okay.
Oh,
Do we
no,
have a
live
public
streaming
participation?
council meetings.
Yes.
Have you got anywhere to putting council meetings out there and live stream?
Not formally, no.
Because I know there are people in the community, that I know somebody, a couple of people in the community who are expert and could advise on it, but I think it's about time we started, because we learned so much. I've learned so much coming to council meetings, but it would be really nice to sit at home and watch it.
You can pass forward.
Mrs. Savage, I want to know, whilst you were away, we did have a strategic planning session, and communication was one of the issues that council.
Oh, good, so you're gonna film it then, eh? You're gonna
No,
send
no. We want to consider communication, what it costs.
So it's about time we.
Yeah, they won't
live stream it. They should.
Okay, thank you.
Two very quick.
So
That's
next, Tuesday.
No.
Brian, did you?
Yeah, Brian, it's 6930 Owen Road. I sat on the transit committee for a little while, and then maybe some information for you. If you want to reduce transit in Lantzville costs, you got to take the busway that runs from Dover School to Woodgrove, because the most bus time is from at the end of school, picks up the kids at Dover. They won't want to walk all the way over to Woodgrove, and some of them aren't kids from Lantzville. They go on that number 10 bus, and we're paying for it. So the other thing with transit, if the city of Nanaimo decides to double the population of the buses from Woodgrove to BIU, because they need it, we pay 10% of that, or within it spread out. So
Now they got area C paying for it too.
we don't get to control, and we get to pay. And no, we don't pay with the Parksville bus, so that's a good thing. I'm kind of disappointed that nobody mentioned about our new planner. And I hope that everybody is aware that what a good planner you're getting out of this new person. Top senior planner from the RDN that was stolen from them. This person already knows the original growth strategy, and she also knows our official community plan, because she's done work here. But the one thing that's unique to Lisa, that I don't think a lot of you have seen, and I have, is her relationship with First Nations. She's probably the only person at the RDN that ever received anything directly as an employee. She received a really nice jacket from them. So regardless of what happens in the foothills, you're going to need a planner. And whether it's 730 units here, or 730 or 400 some here, and 100 some there. I just hope that residents will get away from their negative comments that they seem to make in the public realm about staff. It just seems to keep going on and on and on. So it's time to move away from that. As far as the in-camera meetings, I've sat in a lot of meetings. I totally disagree that there's all this stuff hidden and that it's not being transparent. I think that's a bit of a crock. You can release the information later if you want. You use the messy yard, so you can say, well, we have a messy yard, but we can't see the house number, we can't see the street where the person is. Does the public really give it that? I don't think they really do, but it makes council feel better. The one thing this council has managed to reach that nobody else has in previous councils, you're now up to 100% of having in-camera meetings at regular meetings. So good on you.
Make our case, thank you.
No, that makes no difference. You're still going to have the same number of in-camera meetings. You take one item off a 10-item agenda, you still have an in-camera meeting. So anyway, you're doing really good, 100%.
I will comment on Lisa. At the RDN meeting last week, one of the big discussions was how does the RDN replace that First Nations liaison side of things, because she was doing it on the side of her desk. And effectively, they've come up with a plan of kind of a temporary, because the money's being pulled from existing sources, of some sort of a part-time or half-time individual and trying to source them with regards to First Nations liaison and relationship building. So that into itself is something that we had to consider.
Really respect her.
Yeah. I'm getting waved at here. If you have a motion to extend past 10:30.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Hames, second by Councillor Coulson. Discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Yes.
Ms. Fox, 420 Andrea. Can I just ask a quick question about the sewer? I guess this phase 3 is in our area up in Winchelsea. So if an application goes in February and say everything goes well and they approve it, what's the timeline that you're looking at? I mean, does it mean that in 6 months they're digging holes, or does it mean another 4 years or whatever?
So just quickly, we've been advised that we could hear whether we're successful or not in our application in the fall. So
Okay.
September, October, November, who knows when that'll be. Then from that point, then starts the design process and the public consultation. So it would probably be into 2017 where there's something being, a hole done in the ground per se.
So you're looking at another 2 years after,
Potentially.
even if it's approved. And do you have any idea of whether it's likely to be accepted or not? Like, I understand you applied in October, so I guess that didn't work.
Yeah, no idea, sorry.
Sorry.
No, there wasn't an application in October. There
Or
was
a
some
submission
discussion.
of a.
No, there was discussion about the upcoming program and whether or not it was kind of shelf ready for the application that's going in now.
Okay.
That's when they announced the funding.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that was the funding that you're now
Correct.
applying for. Okay,
Correct.
all right.
The last grant was when, 2009 for sewer?
2008.
And about the bus, we couldn't share the bus from Parksville, right? Would that be cheaper?
That's the only thought.
No?
I think logistically that would take the express part out of it.
Yeah. And our 112 would go way up.
Well, we'd be on the kind of the tail end, we just.
That's when people are getting alley when we get to their destination.
Okay, no, I just wondered.
Yeah.
And I remember too, and this might work in a community, I don't know, but I know the university in Edmonton used to have little bus stops outside for the students, and they would have various destinations written on the bus stops, and if you wanted to go somewhere, you'd wait at that bus stop and somebody would pick you up. And they take you. Now, I don't know whether times are too suspicious now for people to work on something like that, but I've seen that bus going up and down the hill with nobody in it, and just
in where my mom lives on Pender Island, there's this little community stops, and basically you just kind of stand there and Bill going by in his truck says, "Sure, I'll give you a ride." Yeah. Kind of works okay on a little island. There might be some hesitation here.
Yeah.
But nice in the spirit of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Okay. Further public participation.
Very quick.
Public meeting, which I think is great. It does worry me though that a developer is going to sponsor it.
No,
They
will be attending.
But he's not paying for anything, I hope. Maybe juice.
Well, who's paying for it is less my worry than who's hosting it. Thank you.
I mean, that's what I mean.
Yeah,
Who is the
and
host?
the intent of the motion was that the district will host it, but certainly my expectation is the proponent will be there.
Oh, he's got
to
to be
answer
there.
questions and
Yeah,
information.
no, he's got to be there, but not to have any monetary access to it, other than physically being there. He's not gonna pay for the building that you're gonna have it in, or
all the decisions on how it is and that sort of thing, based on my take on the motion, is up to
you guys.
District. Yes.
Sewer, you left a little tiny bit from Leyland. Are they not going to get done?
Are they in phase 2?
They're phase 2.
They're in phase 2. They're done.
No, they're not. There's a little group that are not done off Leyland that you never did.
Giesler.
That's the group that's in there. Giesler's on phase 3. It's in phase 3.
Oh, they are?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And by the way, plants, the daffodils look gorgeous.
But
other ones, come on, guys. Ask somebody in the neighborhood, put it out in the road. Please, would somebody like to take over the upkeep of the 2 plants? The daffodils, the little gorgeous.
once for that.
Once with beer cans.
Yes, that's good too.
Watermark.
And I would have simplified probably, but I forgot, now there was no
I know.
reminder to tell me.
Further participation.
The notice board is ready to be delivered. I had to repaint it. It's going to be delivered to the district office tomorrow.
Thank you.
Oh, brilliant.
And there's a meeting tomorrow night.
They're ready for that. It's going to sound.
Okay. Further public participation. Hearing none. Technically, we need a motion to go to Brian's favorite place. Camera motion. Somebody want to make that motion? Moved by Councillor Scott, camera motion.
Yes.
Right, I can't hear.
Moved by Councillor Scott, seconded by Councillor Negre. Discussion. All right, there's no discussion. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carried.
Thank you very much, you guys.
Thank you, guys.
After all the cameras, everybody wanting the camera.